All right, welcome back to everyone, and welcome to those who are just joining us today. Thank you for being here. As a reminder, we have interpretation services available. If anyone is interested in using headphones for interpretation, please feel free to grab a set. I'd like now to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we call home, the tribal nations of the San Diego region, have historically faced injustices. We acknowledge the harmony that existed between the land, nature, and its original peoples, who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respect to the unceded territory and homelands of the 18 tribal nations in our region, the most in any county of the United States, from 4 cultural groups, the Kumeyaay, Digueño, the Luiseño, the Cupeño, and the Cahuilla. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the SANDAG community, we acknowledge this legacy. We aspire to learn from indigenous traditional knowledge and experiences in undoing the injustices of the past. Now please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Michael, can you please confirm quorum?
I am not seeing a quorum, Chair.
Carolina's just arrived.
Oh.
Carolina just came back in the room. So we have, we have a quorum, is that correct, Michael?
I'm counting here and I'm not seeing one. Coronado absent, Del Mar, El Cajon, Escondido, La Mesa, Oceanside, Poway, San Marcos, Vista, and County? Yeah, I'm not seeing a quorum.
We have Jessica. What? We have Jessica for Lemon Grove. Okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Carolina just left again, 9.
So we have 9.
Yeah. I think we can get going anyway.
Yeah, so just for the record, we don't have a quorum, but we continue with informational non-action items.
Okay, that sounds great. So let's get started with non-agenda public and member comments. We'll start with non-agenda. Okay, the county. Okay, Jill. All right, great.
Oh. We're in and out of a quorum, but I think we can we can go. So the first public comment is Catherine Rhodes, followed by Truth.
Hello, Catherine Rhodes, and as many of you know, I'm a civil engineer, and I always talk about earthquake faults. And you know, I got the state to actually update the Alquist-Pirolo map and put some areas, including the bus stop over on the Alquist-Pirolo map to confirm that it's active. But also Seaport Village. This is another thing I got the state to do. Put the whole of Seaport Village onto the Alquist-Pirolo map. The reason why we have Ryoko Park is because they found an active fault, but they never published the report. They did it slyly and said, oh, we're just doing it for the good of the people, that we're turning this into a park, which you have to do when you have it. Excuse me. This is my thing right here. So here's Seaport Village, and here is the fault going literally through the whole entire Seaport Village. So right now, One Highway 1, the developer, they're trying to not have it go through the California Coastal Commission because as part of the Coastal Act, they say you can't build on active faults. You know, super simple. And the one thing the developer is trying to do is that big, huge, giant tower where they're going to have this big, beautiful tower. That's exactly on the active fault. It's crazy. They could build that tower if they just put it off the fault, 50 feet off the fault, and move it. But because they don't acknowledge it, I have to keep on coming here and keep on wasting my time. So anyway, the California Coastal Commission, pretty soon people are going to blame the California Coastal Commission for not doing their job and trying to stop this project because they're following state law, unlike the city of San Diego or the port of San Diego. So it's just a sad thing that I have to come here and complain all the time, for now 21 years of complaining.
Thank you,
But
Catherine. Your
thank
time
you.
has expired. Next is Truth, followed by Marco Espinoza.
I don't know if anyone noticed that yesterday. I served as the honorary Imperial Beach representative. So here's one IB resident's opinion. Wow, what a nice place to have a meeting on our dime while I work to pay for that bleeping retreat. Stay on them, girls. Somebody's got to keep them on their toes. And so I am here again against the wishes of Mr. Sandman. FYI, in the near future, I'm going to do a public records request on the total cost of this 2-day retreat, and I expect a response from the PIO. I will be CCing everybody onto that email if I do not get a response. And for the backcountry communities disenfranchised by the lack of remote participation option, to drive here from Borrego Springs, it would take at least 2 hours. To take public transit is, of course, impossible, and nobody bikes or walks. Public transit as an option to this meeting for most people was unfeasible, and the map in the SANDAG brochure tried to make it look like it was, and it's not. Yesterday's presentations were mostly well thought out, but it was too much information to the point that I don't really remember anything. Because of the late start, the agenda should have been cut for time and pushed to today. That would have been more respectful of everybody's time, especially if so many reps are going to no-show the retreat. Couldn't they have let us know ahead of time that they're not going to be here? It sounded like advocation is going to be SANDAG's new route, which is not bad, but I didn't really hear tangible goals or new priorities. What would SANDAG do if and when there's huge funding cuts on the state and federal levels? Or if there's new federal goals, because thumbs up, thumbs down children's games are not real solutions. My other critique, I enjoyed doing lunch with the SANDAG money girls, as they are called, but salad doesn't cut it for lunch. We can't all function as an anti-donut, Lisa Hebner. Some of us actually require carbs and cheese, and David knows exactly what I'm talking about. The best part of the treat is actually going outside and looking at the ocean. And despite the May Day communist protesters in the way yesterday, I did enjoy Carlsbad D1. I helped celebrate Knockout Pizzeria's 20th anniversary and had gelato for dessert. And translators, lo siento, I'll talk slower when I'm older. Thank you.
Thank you, Truth. Our last public comment is Marco Espinoza.
Hello, good morning. Marco Espinoza. Nice to be here. I will use the 2 minutes, sorry. Carlsbad, who's Carlsbad? Is Carlsbad here? Sorry. Okay, this is not your water, I know, but Carlsbad water, great water, by the way. When I see it around town, I do like, so. Anyway, per SANDAG, today I did use public transportation to arrive here. Several ride shares, trolley, Pacific Surfliner, rail to rail, thank you. Which actually brings me up to my next thing is, and in no offense to North County cities, really, and to the North County Transit District, but something I do notice on the app, the Pronto app, is that it seems as if North County, it almost seems to me, and I could be wrong, please, you're all smarter than I am, it seems as if MTS supplements North County by the way the tickets are designed. North County has an option to not not have the option and a lower price to not put money into MTS, not have that service. But on the MTS side, South Bay, it doesn't seem like that's a thing. And then also the way that I can't get Coaster, but purchasing an MTS ticket, whereas you can the other way around. And then also then I wouldn't have rail to rail if I'm only purchasing an MTS ticket. Whether it's all really the same, it's all just two names that are really, again, there's a lot I don't know. I apologize. But I'm here to learn. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh, it didn't seem right. I live down there. I want my money and be in my community. That's all. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment, Chair.
Very, very good. Are there any non-agenda member comments? Making sure I see. Okay, I see none. Very good. We'll now move on to item number 2, the SANDAG Board of Directors Workshop. If anybody would like to speak on that, please give your slips to Michael, and toward the end of the day, we will have that opportunity. Before we jump into the plan discussions about Transnet and funding today, I wanted to pick up back on the code of engagement, what does success look like discussion that we weren't able to complete yesterday. I'm grateful for the I'm really grateful for the open and honest conversation we had yesterday about balancing our regional and jurisdictional hats, as well as our working relationship with staff. We did not want to cut that discussion short, and as a result did not get to talk through the final topic in that session, a code of engagement. So we have this handout, and we'll have a presentation pretty soon. It's important for us to discuss this, and I've asked for some additional time this morning to do that. Earlier this year, our independent auditor, if you recall, presented the findings of the 2024 Ethical Climate Survey, where we were able to see how staff views the agency. One of the follow-up conversations from that process was the development of a code of ethics, or as we're calling it, a code of engagement for how the board will work together. As I thought about this concept, I remembered the 2023 Board of Directors retreat. Some of you were at that retreat, and for those of you who weren't, we spent many hours building relationships and researching a series of consensus statements for how the board should work together. It's also the retreat where we established the concepts on the boards along the back here, or the side here. You've been handed hard copies of those consensus statements. They're at your desk. As you'll see, many of the items we agreed on, discussed, and ultimately built consensus around still apply to us today. Some of the key ones that stood out to me, primarily from the honest and respectful collaboration portion and the serving the people of the San Diego region portion. The first was acting in the best interest of the agency and its mission when communicating with the public and the press. The second is having dialogue. The third, finding common ground. The fourth, appreciating staff. And there were others, of course, that we will all be reviewing. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to read through these at your place, and then we will get started on a discussion about them. Does everybody have them? Yeah. If you don't, please raise your hand and staff will make sure you get it.
Are you looking for input on this?
I will be after we all had time to read through them all. You're a fast reader, Joel. Okay, are people pretty much done? Okay. So, do any of these statements stand out to you as something you'd like to share about any of them? Any observations you have about the work that was done? Yes, Supervisor Anderson.
There are two items on this that I brought up yesterday that I didn't see on here. They talked all around it, and some of the items were generic and broad, and others were fairly specific. I think that we have an obligation to read their board packets before we show up, and that if we can ask a question in advance, that we should be doing it so that you're not turning your colleagues into secretaries, taking notes on your brilliance. And while we talked all around it in here, we didn't actually address it. And over the last 5 years, although in the last year it's not been bad at all, in previous years, that was half of our meeting. That's why we never got to complete anything. So that's my only addition. Everything else is pretty straightforward from my perspective.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Councilmember Molina.
Thank you, Chair Huebner. I love the very first bullet point on here, have dialogue. I didn't get to speak yesterday, but I realized yesterday we had the slide up that had the title for this presentation. And I realized it took me a little while. I kept expecting for the comments to stop and a slide presentation to begin and staff to take over, right? And I realized, oh no, this is the topic. This is how we are handling this, is we are all in discussion with each other. We're speaking and listening to each other. And so that is what I want to see more of, is actually talking to each other, being present and having a discussion and sharing ideas and understanding each other, or at least having the opportunity to understand each other, right? We are not always going to agree, and that's okay. We're not supposed to all agree, but we are supposed to have the opportunity to speak with each other, and this is exactly why we gather. I really do appreciate that that was, when it clicked for me yesterday, that was how we were going to have that topic yesterday, how it was going to be handled. It was perfect. So I really appreciate how that happened. So bullet number one, have dialogue, I think is exactly right, is how do we build success, is have dialogue with each other.
Very good. Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Chair. And I think one of the most important things that it's jumping out to me, I love that not become LA, which is congested traffic. And we are, right? That's what we're heading into. The mornings are just unbearable. And then us in South County, we grandfather in all the people that are coming across the border, to be exact, around 100,000 people that come work. Like around 100,000 people. I mean, this is through Customs and Border Protection's data and data. But I would also emphasize on homeownership is our most important thing. People still dream about the white picket fence, right? We can't just build. We're, we were talking yesterday about many family members living in a room. That's not ideal. Even when they can buy, just living between four walls is not ideal. We need to keep our mindset, and people still dream about the white picket fence. So bringing it back for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Joy.
Yeah, the homeownership one jumps out immediately, because that's how you build generational wealth. That's how you invest your money, and for your current situation and for future generations, there's nothing like home ownership. So I'm somewhat distressed to always see that we have so many low-income and affordable and housing units going in, and everything is paid for through rent. There's not an avenue or pathway to help people become homeowners, and that's a really important piece of a family's wealth. So I'm glad to see that on here, and I hope we find a way to make that happen.
And if I could just build on that, I know one of the other frustrating things about this is oftentimes if it's a deed-restricted home that is for sale, the occupants don't get to participate in the increase in value. or it's limited, depending on what the agreement is, which is a frustration as well. Yeah, very good. Councilmember Shin?
Good morning. I think I came at a great time where everyone really does show a lot of respect and are cordial here regardless of opinions. So ignorance is bliss for me in regards to that. So I see us following a lot of this. I just hope we continue it. What I don't see here is a lot of discussion as economic vitality as a part of one of the priorities that SANDAG should have. If we think about policies that we create, we always tend to look at our residents, but we don't always look at the people who are actually creating the economic driver where our sales tax comes from. So as a small business owner, I would always see policies that are being taken up that it almost hampers us as small business owners. There's issues with the state with that, and then it can end up trickling down to our local regions. So when we're not doing an analysis that shows that, hey, by doing these projects, we can create this much more economy and those sales tax can come back to us. For us in the commercial spaces, we don't see the purpose of SANDAG as really being a partnership with us. And and this is policy, so I hope I don't upset people too much, but when we talk about tax increases by percentage to gain revenue, I never saw that as the best solution because it'll eventually not work out, right? I see volume. So if we're doing things that are helping support sales gross take place, that amount of sales tax will come back to us in a different format. It'll come in volumes because I don't mind if you're helping me make 10% more in revenue and then giving you that sales tax because of it, as opposed to you taking more percentage away from myself and customers as well. So somewhere in our priorities, it would be great that not that we're just helping people who live here, but people who are creating and taking the risk of creating the businesses here.
So the way that SANDAG would help with that would be in their revenue generation policies and also in the data that is presented with the policies. Is that?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
As soon as he answers my follow-up question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the only thing I saw here that showed like I guess a sense of economic vitality was a section that just stated, it was quite low on the list.
These aren't really prioritized. This was just capturing what groups work together. We had to come to consensus on statements, which is why some of them dance around the issue a little bit, because we had to come to consensus on certain ideas.
Yeah, all it says is the SANDAG supports transportation infrastructure improvements that enhance local jobs. And that's great when we're talking about workers, but as a small business, I don't see where I'm being represented, right? That commerce is able to move more efficiently, and how much more better is that? How can I get the customers to me? So we're talking about going home, work from home, but I'm also thinking about that third space, which is my business. So how do I get customers to my space that much more quicker, conveniently? And then I know I can create revenue through that.
So I'm still wanting to dig a little deeper. How does SANDAG help with that?
So
given all of our...
I'd say through analysis, right? And then showing that when we do create these projects, that it's going to increase this amount of commerce then, if that makes sense. So justification of the rails, part of it is because we're moving freight down. Well, if we didn't have the rail system, we're going to lose X amount of dollars coming in, right? So if we double track, let's just say that's one of our justifications, I want to also see the numbers saying, okay, by double tracking, we're going to increase our economic vitality by so much. We don't seem to create that analysis, and it would be great because then I as a city representative, can tell businesses that are not here or trying to create business, hey, come here, come to the San Diego County region. We're doing things to make commerce flow.
So, for instance, when we were speaking about the Los San, and we pointed out that, the Los San corridor moved $5 billion worth of goods. You're saying when we double track, it will increase that to X.
Just whatever the number is,
Yeah.
right? But to put the priority up far more higher, it just shows that we do have a sense of like business acumen through this. We're not just looking at, and this is what I realized too, just from my time of just running for office, is that everyone gets so focused on the residents and the voters, as we should. However, we don't hop into the small businesses and actually ask them and tangibly understand what they're going through at times. I think a lot of people have never cut the front of a paycheck before and signed one. And so there's a disconnect that ends up happening because they don't understand the risks and what really government needs to do to help businesses thrive. And so if this body can help do that, prove the modeling, we're doing things for commerce as well, we can use that and we can do outreach. Like our economic development folks can go outside of our region and say, and poach them. Poach our businesses back from out of state and out of county and say, come back here, we're doing the right things.
Before I get to Councilmember Edson, did you have another follow-up question, Mayor Minto?
Yeah, I think the biggest question is for our businesses, are they involved in their local chambers of commerce? Are they involved in their economic development councils and maybe even the regional chamber of commerce? Because that's where a lot of that happens, since we can't be a one-stop fits all. Although what we could do is on occasion maybe partner with the regional chamber of commerce, or like for instance in North County, the North County Economic Development Council, who's driving more of the commerce side of it, business and industry, and find out what kind of needs they have, because then we can always advocate at the state level for regulations that do exactly what you say. They hinder or even stop jobs from or businesses from even opening. So maybe that's something that we can look into as a partnership so that we can help them, because when we help them, it helps you. And I would always recommend being part of a chamber or an EDC, because that's where the everything from tertiary to quaternary business is taken care of.
Yeah, I completely believe you. I'm actually on the board of the Oceanside Chamber, and it's been a part of it. I think what also takes place, though, is if you think when you're stressed and you're owning a business, you have time for nothing else.
I'll talk with you later offline about some ways you can fix it.
Absolutely. So just to show that we have it as a sense of a priority.
Yeah,
that's all.
For sure. I think also this is bullets that came from the past meetings, but we definitely have our missions, our visions, and our goals, and in addition, going really diving down to the weeds. SANDAG is a member of the multiple EDCs, and it's a member of a couple of chambers, and we get involved and we try to hear from the business community. We can always do better. On the goals that the agency pursues that has been discussed, some high-level ones are, we always think about safety. We are always looking at moving people and goods, equity, the environment, but also prosperity and economic vitality. And that's something that we are always looking at, because we clearly understand that people move for a reason, right? It's not just for leisure, it's to go to work. We need to make businesses more accessible so they can thrive. So it is clear. We also, when we go into focus environmental documents of specific projects, the environmental document has an economic section, and it's not just on the cost, but what it would bring. But I hear you, and I think we do have even a goods movement a section at the agency that deals on moving goods. But I hear what you're saying, a broader thing of the economy is what moves us. Let's also have a focus on that, and let's hear what the different motors in the economy, go and hear them even more to understand what are the needs.
Yeah, I think we language it almost like how we have core values in different organizations.
Yes, for
if
sure.
we language it up here, because that's why I didn't see it in language, then we know we're thinking about it in our heads, and it's a part of a context of why it is that we exist.
Yeah, one thing that I'll just give you as an example that was like hit me hard was when I was talking with the CEO of the airport. And I mentioned, I think, this to leadership, and we were talking about transit to the airport. And Kim says, look, Mario, my travelers are going to know how to get here one way or another. Yes, we need to enhance it. But you know what I'm really worried about? My workers begin at 3 and 4 a.m. They don't have cars, the majority of them, and they use transit, but transit doesn't run at that time. And I go, okay, I get it. And that immediately got MTS, the airport, SANDAG, having a working group on how to enhance and expand schedules. So yes, we need to do more of that.
Great. That's all. Thank you.
Councilmember Redson.
Yes, so I was present for this exercise, and it was a great exercise. It didn't actually establish core values. There's no priorities that are within this, but we were broken into groups, and we discussed among us things that we could agree needed to be done. And SANDAG chose the groups, so they made it sure that we were working across the aisles, and we got to work with people we might not otherwise speak with or hang out with. So it was really good opportunity to do that. So there were a lot of things to me, looking back at this, that still resonate with me, but I hear what you're saying about other things that we might want to add, right? Because I think this is, while this is not establishing our core values, they are things that are important to the agency and to the residents of our region. So, and SANDAG itself, our organization, because a lot of this exercise was how do we work together to accomplish things. And so again, the heading respectful and honest collaboration, right? So finding common ground, honoring the process, allowing things, asking questions that are informed, doing your homework, asking questions that are informed, and working towards solutions collaboratively together. Providing accurate and clear information to our constituents. Well, we get that information from staff and from our meetings and the discourse that happens at our meetings and the questions that we ask. And it's really important that we continue to provide accurate and clear information to the public, which always takes me to the should not use media in a divisive manner. And I think that it's important that when that happens, that SANDAG make it known what the actual facts are and what the truth of situations is, because otherwise people are only getting a soundbite of something that's a little disingenuous, perhaps, or not quite accurate. And we don't want to have that be the story, right? We have to control the narrative so that people understand the reality of situations. Holding the agency accountable without undermining it, very important, right? We all, as board members, have a responsibility to make sure that SANDAG performs what they're supposed to do and that they are doing the right thing. But it doesn't mean that we do that by picking it apart or tearing it apart. We just continue to make sure that they move in the right directions. And for example, with audit and the other processes that we have. Constructively questioning staff on proposals, including the pros, cons, and risks. This is really important. Being in the board meetings gives us the opportunity to really ask those questions and shine some light, but do it in a constructive way. It's always important to me. And respecting staff's technical expertise while upholding our government responsibility and respecting each other and staff. Ensuring any significant policies and projects are brought to the board before being publicly announced. That's something that hasn't happened in a while, but it happened for a while, and it was really uncomfortable for the board to have staff, get ahead of us and maybe make some decisions that the board would not have necessarily agreed to. The endeavoring to build consensus and avoid jeopardizing state and federal funding, so important because those funds are hard to obtain. There's a lot of work that goes into getting to that point, and
if we start tearing things apart, again, go back to the media, things, and or sending messages to the public that aren't true, we can jeopardize that funding, and that's pretty irresponsible, in my opinion. We have more in common than we don't, which is true. And I think that we saw that pretty much on every sheet, because each sheet was from a different table. This is for Kevin's benefit next to me. That we do have more in common than we don't, right? We're all representing constituents who have a diverse set of needs, sometimes not always the same needs, sometimes conflicting needs. But we have an opportunity to use this unity, this common ground, to deliver to our communities. Improve the quality of life for all San Diegans. And we all know that that's really what we do as elected officials anyway. I mean, that's why I ran, to help my people. Provide effective transportation for the entire region. And that's not just my NCTD hat, that's my belief in general. I grew up here, I rode public transportation. As a college student, I rode public transportation. Early in my days in the workforce, I relied on it. And I think that there's always the opportunity to improve it. So that's, let's see, being good stewards of public funds. Always important. Increasing transit frequency, that's where I needed to jump from my other, from transportation. We definitely need to increase transit frequency, and provide transportation options to all who need mobility. And it's not just people who rely on public transit, but we need to consider and attract choice riders, not only those who have to rely on public transit. Right? So I have a choice on SANDAG Fridays. Do I hop on the coaster and go down and then maybe jump on the mid-coast? Don't need to so much with the new location. But, or do I take a car, right? Or do I carpool? I always try to do something that is better than just getting in my car as a single rider. So I have a choice, but I have to be able to get both to a meeting and home from a meeting without losing crazy amounts of time. So that gets us back to frequency and the importance of that. I think it's important for SANDAG to recognize the unique constraints of each jurisdiction, and not just SANDAG, but at the state level too. So I think that SANDAG, as our MPO, needs to coordinate with the state on so many things. Rena, help us. We all recognize that current state laws exist, even if we want to change them. So SANDAG has power. Right? We're a big group. Let's work with the state to revise RENA methodology, and let's work with the state on we spoke about the GHG and VMT reduction goals. This is, we need to flex our muscle and really make our needs be known. Public transit, again, extended hours are really important to attract riders, and innovative pilot programs for alternative transportation options, because the pilots have been great, very successful, but we don't have funding anymore. So let's find some funding to make, if we want to be innovative with transportation and make it work for more people more of the time, we need to fund it. So that's my 2 cents.
Good comments, thank you. I always remember that when people are in the media and they're criticizing SANDAG, that they are SANDAG. Like, we are SANDAG. So let's be mindful of the fact that we play a role here in an important role, and that's what dialogue and consensus building is about. If there's something that you're not pleased with that's happening, let's discuss it and try and come to a constructive, maybe middle ground or whatever. And that's, this purpose of a body like this. We're multi-jurisdictional. We all come from different backgrounds, different experiences, and that's what's our strength. We get to bring that all together for the betterment of the region that we all call home. So I think that is reflected in a lot of the sentiments here on this sheet. Mayor Sanchez.
Thank you very much. I wanted to add to the idea about commerce and transportation. And in fact, transportation is the heart of commerce. All of our cities started by being either because they're at a port, commerce along the rail, commerce, the freeways, commerce. Truly, that is why we are able to attract small businesses, because they know that there is this, busyness. There are people, especially in Oceanside and Carlsbad, where we, tourism is a big deal. And so those train stations are critical for us. The shop that you established in Oceanside, busy, you had people from all over, sometimes the world, if you started talking to the folks that were coming in. And it's amazing. It's truly amazing how much transportation really plays in our small businesses. It's for all. And so the bottom, really the commonality here is the fact that we need to be able to get people easily to their destinations, be it because they're the boss of a business and they need to be there on time, employees, but also visitors and daytime crowds, very critical. If you don't have the transportation, people are going to skip you because, oh, it's way over there and I don't have time to get there. But certainly transit, whether regionally, connecting all of our cities and all in our entire region, and also within our cities. So I do feel that these do pick that up, but I think what you're saying is, look, let's also call it what it is, and it's about commerce as well. So it is about commerce is, being there and investing in the city, but also working there. That's also an investment. So that is something that I think we need to continue to work through. And I hear the comments about RENA. We need this representation at Sacramento. Obviously, they're not hearing our voices, neighbors' voices. They're not hearing us. So maybe when we're a mighty force, a bigger force, all saying the same thing, maybe they'll start listening. And we have our representatives from San Diego County. They need to be the first to listen to our voices and have consequences if they don't. I don't think we've put that out there. I think that we continue to, want to have representation, but it's our responsibility as well to say, look, you're not representing us. If you're not representing us, then we need to find others that will. So, but definitely commerce is at the heart. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Zito.
Thanks. Yeah, and apologies in advance if this is a little bit of PTSD of my 4 years of chair of audit, but I just wanted to go back and rehash some of the things that Councilmember Edson brought up around the first page. I think what I have to say is really captured pretty well on the right side of the first page, although maybe not as clearly as very simply saying that I think we need to approach our job in this organization from a mindset of assume the best and find out the truth, as opposed to, it seems like a lot of times it's assume the worst and try to prove that's the case. So, I haven't, like Supervisor Anderson mentioned, I haven't seen a lot of that in the past, 6 to 9 months or so, and that's good, but I also would note that we really haven't had any challenging audits come back in the last 6 to 9 months, and I would bet at some point in time we're going to have a rough audit come back to this board, and then we need to make sure that's tackled appropriately and that dialogue and discourse happens correctly in the most constructive way possible. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Councilmember Chavez.
I just wanted to add to my previous comments when we were talking about understanding what discourages people from using public transit. On my time serving on the board of MTS a couple of years ago, I remember seeing a focus group that I've been very vocal about that still haunts me to this day, where we found out many things, right, that our community, especially, talking again about the Blue Line being 2.1, million a month, 24 million a year. So that sets us as the most transited line in the county. But also, the focus group showed a lot of people from the Blue Line, using the Blue Line, that they wouldn't use the Blue Line because they can run, but their kids can't. Things like that. They have no live feed, we found out. So I learned that through a colleague in the city of San Diego when I was working in District 3, that my colleague had racial slurs screamed to her the whole trip from Chula Vista to downtown, and this person would follow her on every single cart she went through. So when we asked, and we asked the safety director, do you have live feed so you can tell PD to grab this person that's doing this? And they're like, well, no, we just have recordings in case of an investigation, right? So, and then they told me, well, we have a scan, you can QR, we have a QR code in case you feel unsafe, or you can text. People don't dimension that we're not doing enough for public safety. We did add staff on site, but it isn't enough, right? 3 months ago, we cut the ribbon, actually in Chula Vista for 910, which is the bus stop, the bus service that's coming from the north. But like I said, and I previously mentioned, we have around 100,000 people crossing every single day to be our workforce, because they can't afford to live here. And we're not doing anything to be faster, safer, affordable, efficient. We need to focus more on what are the challenges. And we request this focus group from MTS so this board can listen to it. It literally changed the whole perspective of what I thought we were missing on MTS, and I think there's more to it that we can work and push for.
Thank you. Supervisor Anderson, did you have something to add?
I did, just briefly. I wanted to give you and the previous chairs since Nora credit. You know, part of the reason why people go to the press is they're running for another office and they're making hay. Another reason is they feel oppressed and their voice doesn't count. We've seen a functional change since Nora said that she would never use the weighted vote. That took a lot of steam out of the room, because some of the people, even if they agreed with you, felt that they were wronged before they even started. The other thing is we made a big step in including 600,000 people that live in the unincorporated. And today we have an advisory vote that's here with us, with Robin, that is being more inclusive. And I think that while we don't always focus on the things that we've done right, I just wanted to refocus and thank you for your leadership, and thank the board, the previous boards, for having the insight to be more inclusive and to remove the stupid reasons why people go to the press. Now, I can't stop people from running for office and putting themselves before their communities. Can't stop that. It's always going to happen. Unfortunately, we're frail, but legitimate reasons, I believe, have been removed in a way that we have a better future before us. So I just want to give kudos to the leadership that had the foresight to say, we're only going to get through this if we work together. And that means we can't be, if you have to go to a weighted vote, you're stepping on somebody to get there. And we've got to agree. And we're never going to have any clout in Sacramento if we all can't be on the same page and go to our local legislators and put some demands on them. We have a right to demand that our legislators represent our interest. And as a former state legislator, I got to tell you, I would reach out, with the exception of John Minto, I'd reach out to my cities, my school boards. Anybody that worked in my office knows that we would reach out in January of every year and ask people, what do you need, what do you want, so that I'm working on your behalf. And we had diversity in my office, I mean in my district, but 80% of it we all agree on. It's easy, it's not that hard. And yet, when I called those districts, the water managers, the water directors, the superintendents of schools and their boards, only a handful actually had a plan and knew what they wanted, because nobody had ever called them before me. And I thought, this is the craziest thing in the world. How do you represent people if you don't ask them what they want and need? And so I think that this is a fresh start. I think for the first time in 5 years, I hear people, thank you, Esther, for talking about how we need to put demands and ask our local electeds in the legislature to represent us in a way that we feel represented, not them making pals in Sacramento. There's nothing wrong with that. However, it can't be at the demise of our cities in our unincorporated communities.
Thank you. Anybody else before I wrap this up? Yes.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to point out, I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday. We had a few changing priorities yesterday, unfortunately, so I missed it. But I just wanted to comment that the DoD is one of the largest employers in this region. Our personnel are in each of the member jurisdictions of SANDAG. And I'm hoping that in the data-driven decisions that the DoD employment data is accurately reflected in SANDAG's planning, and we hope to continue working with SANDAG on that. It's really important that we plan for all modes of transportation to and from our Navy facilities, so that, one, we can get people to work and improve their quality of life, and then reduce our transportation impacts on the local communities. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately is, we were required to return to office work in February. So we were doing a significant amount of teleworking before that requirement, and we had to do a lot of changes. We have been encouraging employees to use transit. However, two of the barriers that we're getting feedback on is security. People are not necessarily feeling safe taking transit to work. And then the other big barrier is balancing work-family life. So for example, from a personal standpoint, I spend a significant amount of time every week driving my kids to and from school and to all their various activities. And I'm wondering if we can collaborate with the school districts more. We have very large school districts in this region, and we do not have school busing, and that is one of the major impediments for people to take transit, is that they have to pick up their kids to and from school. That's all I had. I just wanted to provide those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Edson, follow up?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. I wanted to thank Esther for her comments regarding transportation and add to that goods movement. So there's billions of dollars generated in economic generation from goods movements through our region, and that's really an important factor that a lot of people, think, oh, well, we don't need the train. We do need the train, or the tracks anyway. YOP, funding for YOP, and I know this discussion has been at the board level as well, but I would be remiss if I didn't remind and add that to the list of things that I think are really high priority and very important, because it's been a great, YOP's been great for increasing the number of riders on public transportation. And I do sincerely believe that if people ride when they're young, that they will continue to ride as they age. Environment, we didn't touch on that, and it's on pretty many of these pages as well, so I think that continues to be a really big priority with every project that we build and do, and consider that we need to consider its impacts on our natural environment. Touching again back on RENA, that when we do speak to and speak out to Sacramento, that we call out the fact that affordable housing is not what's being generated by what these housing bills have been, right? So what we're getting is lots of above market and tiny little bits of affordable. If the goal is really affordable housing, they need to fix it.
Very good. So this conversation is about, Councilmember Fisher, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I apologize not being here today. Just a couple comments from page 2. It talks about working collaboratively with Mexico. And I agree with that. I have a growing frustration that since the new designation from Mexico has joined the board, they've not shown up for any meetings other than the original one. Maybe they're there on a meeting or two that I missed. But I think that's an important part, that seat gets filled. And, it's an important part of it. I know there's some workings behind the scenes. I know that Mario's talked to Mexico a lot, but for somebody to have a seat at this board and not use it is frustrating to me, because it's an important part of the discussion. And I think we've seen with, the unincorporated representation how important that is to have that voice. Also on page 2 at the top, it says, ensure we are perceived as trustworthy and ensure we are perceived as competent. I would just make that say that ensure that we are trustworthy and ensure that we are competent.
Yeah, first Vice Chair.
I do have my habit of going last. This is really good stuff. I appreciate the context in which it was created because there's a lot of stuff on here. The one thing that really kind of struck me is, at least from my point of view, we are 18 cities in the county of San Diego, and it's not just us board members that have the privilege of actually showing up at the public meetings and casting the votes. And I would certainly want the code of conduct to apply to every elected official in every city, because we've seen some recent op-eds that I found a little bit disturbing and frustrating. As Supervisor Anderson said, campaign season brings all sorts of conversations out to their particular agenda going forward. And I also appreciated the conversation earlier in the day yesterday about, whether you're coming here with your regional hat on, you're coming here with your jurisdictional hat. And it really helped me focus later in the day when you passed, or the staff passed out the Transnet funding, city by city by city. And you could actually see how much of the larger SANDAG pie actually is targeted about what we want in our particular jurisdiction. That is not a regional issue, whether it goes to commerce or housing or anything in between, was particularly helpful and a good reminder. I think Mario made this point yesterday, and everybody's, I think, making this point, is to remind us of the good things that SANDAG has done, because it's easy to forget, and use that as a base for positivity going forward. And then perhaps, Chair, to give you a segue, are we going to turn this into a code of engagement, or what's the next step?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yes, this is all about a code of engagement that came out of the Ethical Climate Survey. And if you recall, we talked about a code of ethics at the time. Code of engagement sounds a little bit more approachable and applicable to this group. And so what I'd like to do is have staff bring a consolidated document back to us after having listened to everybody. And there's some things in here that were clearly in response to the before times, the bad times on SANDAG. I don't think we would need all of those anymore, or they could be tweaked to reflect a reality. So if you could bring that back to us, maybe run it by the leadership before it comes to the board, so we can make sure that everything was captured and that we can go forward with an item that would come to the board that we could all then say, yes, I agree to that, and I will abide by this code of engagement.
Chair?
So thank you. Oh, yeah. Second Vice Chair.
Sorry, I forgot to raise my hand earlier. There's just one thing I want to add.
Go right ahead.
And that was the most important part of this is don't deceive the public.
Yeah.
And as a follow-up, work together and don't deceive our colleagues.
I'm with you. Okay, so, next item on the books here is about funding, and it's very good that we just had this other conversation, because we're going to have a series of conversations with this board about our priorities and how best to make use of the finite funding that we have, and we don't know the state of some of the funding from the feds and thus the state. So with that, I'd like to ask Mario to give us an overview of what we hope to accomplish through today's conversations, and then he can turn it over to Susan and Michelle.
Sure, thank you. As we discussed yesterday at the last section, there was a brief overview of Transnet. And today, you're going to see a little bit of that again. But you're also going to see all the other funding sources that this agency deals. The purpose of the discussion today is, like I've said yesterday also, this is to plant the seed of what's going to be the conversation in the next 12 months on prioritizing the different things that SANDAG does, because we need to clearly understand that SANDAG plans, SANDAG builds, SANDAG preserves, and SANDAG provides programs and services and grants. So we cannot just be focused on one single item or one of those buckets. And like we saw yesterday, the Transnet ordinance has boxes, locked boxes, where certain percentages go for different programs. So today we're going to provide you a more in-depth picture of the state of the finances and some assumptions based on the early action items, based on projects that were on the list of the Transnet proposed ordinance, and make assumptions of what would happen if we have to deliver those items by 2035, as Antoinette said, that 10-year horizon to start showing that we're meeting those emissions with the projects that we're proposing with the RTP, with the assumption that we're still being very successful in going with a $1 of Transnet brings $3 of federal and state funding or other funding sources, and just showing you that there's a gap, and I think it's a reality that every city has, and every government agency. There's not enough for what all the needs are. But today is that beginning of a conversation for how we're going to deal and continue funding that robust shelf that Antoinette spoke about, of having planning documents keep moving, so we keep having that vision, short and long term. How we start building and getting projects moving so we can also foster our economy and get it moving. How do we maintain and preserve the environment, and that the environmental mitigation, 9,000 acres that were mentioned that we have acquired, and how do we keep preserving and mitigating, and how we provide grants for bike programs. How do we extend the Youth Opportunity Pass program? If we put it all in the blender, there's not enough. So the next conversation, the next 12 months is, what do we do? What do we keep moving? How do we keep moving the machine so we're whole with those 4 pillars of items that the agency has to provide? So I'm going to pass it on to the team. As you know, I always interrupt them, but it's to kind of put in that perspective. So take it away, Michelle.
All right, thank you, Mario. So good morning. So how many of you remember the movie Back to the Future? So I hope everybody's hands are up. Thank you. Okay. So like the movie, sometimes we need to look back in order to see what the future will look like. So looking back 20 years, is there anything you did then that you would do differently now? Just saying. Yeah? No? Okay. Would you hop in that DeLorean and take some information that you have with you now and do things differently back then? Would you make a different decision? I'm thinking maybe, yeah? Okay. All right, so my name is Michelle Smith, and I'm the manager of the Strategic Capital Funding and Oversight, Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, or the ITOC, and I'm here to provide an update on the Transnet program, as Mario introduced. And as you're aware, the world has changed dramatically through the last 20 years, including a global pandemic, and that has changed the way people have used transportation. So today we are going to take a look at where we have been, where we are, and what the future can hold for us.
Michelle, as you're going to start, one thing that I'm not sure if Antoinette mentioned it during the regional plan presentation. She mentioned something very important. We are meeting our target emissions reduction, 19%. But Antoinette, I don't know if you're there, but one of the major things that we're dealing with, or that we found out, is that we're using data post-pandemic, right? And do you want to kind of let them know kind of what that data, we're the first regional plan that is using traffic data from a post-pandemic period. And that's what actually helped us. I don't know if you just want to expand a little bit before Michelle.
Yes, so before we started developing the transportation network for the regional plan, we went out and we did not only our usual regional household travel survey, but we did a telework survey of both employees and employers. We did commercial vehicle survey. We did cross-border survey. We collected a ton of data on travel patterns, and they're very different than they were prior to the pandemic. So we have more people working from home, as you would suspect, but those folks aren't just staying at home. They're making a lot of different types of trips at different times of the day. They're shorter trips, so their VMT is lower overall because it's not the same amount of miles as if they were traveling to a workplace every day. And that helped us out quite a bit, right? Because the per capita VMT was a bit lower. I think that was the key point. Okay. questions about that?
Okay, it's her.
All right, thanks, Antoinette. So before we dive in, I wanted to take a moment to walk us through what is Transnet. So Susan Huntington provided a great in-depth presentation yesterday on the history of Transnet and where we have been. So I'm just going to provide a quick overview as a refresher. So the first Transnet was passed in 1988, and in 2004, voters approved an extension to our Transnet ordinance, which passed in 2004. The funds started in 2008 and goes through 2048. So, getting into our DeLorean, although I don't have Dr. Marty here with us, I would like to take you back to 2004 when Transnet Extension Ordinance was passed by the voters to provide additional transportation funding for the San Diego region. As you know, and as Susan referred to yesterday, a lot has changed. So, 20 years ago, gas was, anybody remember? $2.41 a gallon, and the average home price was $450,000. The main focus of the board at that time was providing projects related to relieve congestion and create an early action program to ensure certain projects were delivered. The ordinance went into effect in 2008, and in this time frame, the region has delivered hundreds of highway, bike, transit, local streets and roads projects, but that's not all. We've also have delivered habitat conservation, including land management projects, active transportation, and other grant programs that have helped transit and seniors get around with help to further better land use, transportation integration throughout smart growth projects. The measure also mandated that an independent taxpayer oversight committee, or an ITOC, be formed to provide an enhanced level of accountability and transparency of these funds and to develop recommendations for improvements for this program. So, this should look familiar. Susan presented this Transnet flow of funds yesterday during her presentation as well. This should be in your packet. If it's not, we will provide you a different printout or a link. This is also directly on our SANDAG website. So this is the flow of funds that Mario had referred to. So off the top, we have our Transnet sales tax coming in. We have our 2% for admin, our 2% for our bike program, and our amount that goes directly to our ITOC activities, which pays for their review, their meetings, as well as their triennial performance audit and their annual fiscal and compliance audits. After all that is taken off, we have our net annual revenues, and it goes to these different, what we like to call buckets, and these are the different buckets that is split out within the ordinance. Today, we're going to kind of focus for this presentation on that 38% of the major corridor capital projects. So, the Transnet for today. So with that, what does the present look like? What kind of progress have we made? So since passing the Transnet extension, Transnet has generated about $5 billion. That's with a B. So that equates to, if you were to go to the movies and buy a $10 movie ticket, you could watch your favorite movie 500 million times, which is a lot. So with that amount of funding, we have been able to add 20 miles of high occupancy vehicle lanes, expanding the bike network by adding 25 new miles of bikeway, and creating new transit services all the way from South Bay to Escondido. So, we're going to go back again to 2005. So 20 years ago, the SANDAG board developed the Transnet Early Action Program, or EAP. At this time, this was a strategic move to bring many of the ordinance projects forward to be built sooner. SANDAG was able to bond funds early in order to allow projects to come in early and build cheaper at that time. For example, as Susan also mentioned yesterday, in 2009, we went through the Great Recession. So this had costs down and allowed projects to be built cheaper and earlier. And also, as Mario mentioned, this was great for the economy and helped with unemployment and had a positive impact on San Diego's overall economy. However, by doing this, we did create a debt program in which incoming revenues will need to pay for debt first and then be available for projects. We did this for our major corridor program, our bike program, and our environmental mitigation program. Now, we do not have an opportunity moving forward for more debt, so we will be utilizing what we call a pay-as-you-go program. So this will change the way that we deliver projects moving forward, which means we no longer have that upfront cash available, and we will use the money as funding becomes available.
Let me just kind of rephrase that a little bit. it is your decision. We will advise you to not incur in any large debt. It is our recommendation that we go on a pay-as-you-go basis. But at the end of the day, if this board wants to do something else, this board is the boss, not a staff. But that's why we're recommending that we pay as we go with the cash flows that the ordinance is generating. But I wanted to make that clear. That decision is not ours as a staff. It's a recommendation, and as we move through the conversations through the year and bring you options, we will bring all the options. I think part of this document that was discussed also, it doesn't talk specifically, it says we're a data-driven organization. It should say we make decisions on objective information and alternatives, and that's what we're going to be bringing. So I want to make that clear.
I have a quick question, if I can, since we're talking about sales tax revenue. We're going back to 1985 again. And a question Marty might have is, what was the annual average of sales tax, generated at that point in time, maybe compared to the annual average sales tax generated today? Because I think the question is there, even though, because at any point in time you can have the turn down in the economy, or downturn in the economy, sorry. And can that be predicted now over the next 15 to 20 years, like what we've gone through, and say what we would be able to, what it might be in the 20 years in the future? And because maybe we made some mistakes back then on how much we were going to be able to bond against, so we don't want to make that same mistake in the future, because I think those important numbers to have, maybe.
So we're bringing the Marnie of today to answer that question, our principal economist.
Hello, Naomi Young. So if I'm summarizing your question, you're basically asking how well can we forecast?
Well, does that forecast match up with what actually happened? Because we have at least 20 years, to look back at to see how we did.
Yeah, so we've made corrections to our forecast in almost every year, particularly as a result of two significant events to date, one being the Wayfair decision, where we didn't factor in the revenue that would come from that, so that was a positive. The second was COVID, where we just didn't anticipate how consumers would respond to fiscal stimulus payments and everything else. Looking forward, what we're seeing is that there is a settling down and a normalization of how consumers are spending their money, and how that's shifting in terms of taxable and non-taxable items. Some of the biggest things that really affect our Transnet revenue is gas prices. It's one of the biggest factors, and we're seeing that in automobile sales. Those things will normalize as we forecast forward, so they'll become more even. Tariffs are going to be an issue in terms of whether it creates some inflationary pressure. Those things are all factored in, and typically what I would say is that like our forecast methodology allows us to adjust in the first 5 years, and then the long-term tail end we don't. So to your question, I'm far more confident in where we are in a projection 5 years forward. Where we are in the last 10 years of Transnet, that's where, that's just really far out, and our methodology doesn't allow us to adjust for that. So, I think the short answer is that our methodology allows us to reestablish a baseline that I think is starting to show that it's reasonable for planning perspective, and it's reflecting what the current economy looks like and how it's been renormalized in a post-COVID period.
Okay.
But the long term, I would say the last 10 years of our forecast, that's the place where I'd put the biggest uncertainty bound. And so taking a conservative approach and being confident in the revenues that we have in the short term are reasonable practice.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's obviously a lot more complicated than what I was thinking, but I thought it was worth at least bringing it up because I don't think, well, certainly there weren't a lot of people here in 1987, if anybody, and so we wouldn't have known what the forecast was. We know we did have a big hiccup in our forecast at one time, and I guess that's the normalization that you might be even talking about. So, but as we go forward and we talk about all this, I think it's important to have good data or as the most reliable data that we can have.
Yeah, and I just do want to point out, just responding to a comment I had heard at a previous board meeting, our Transnet forecast revenue and our short-term adjustments for the first 5 years are not projections of linear trends. So I mean, if I opened the workbook up and you looked in detail, you'd see that there's some non-linearity that we're considering. So what we're thinking about
What
is
does that mean?
Non-linearity? Oh, I'm sorry. It means we're not just taking a straight average and projecting it forward. So in other words, what we're allowing for and we're taking into consideration in our projections are significant disruptions that happen to the economy like what we just saw.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mayor Ehlers, I think, might have a follow-up.
I have a follow-up question to what Mario said, not about the economic projection. It was about I thought you made a very important comment there about not wanting to borrow anymore. And I was wondering if you could give us more background on why. In other words, typically it's what our revenue debt load is, our debt load to revenue ratio is, or something like that, and its impact on our bonding. But could you fill that in? Because I want to know what the limit is.
And we're bringing the financial expert.
There you go.
But I'll just start with, currently staff, the way we're working projects is we're paying as we go. We haven't come with any bonding proposals. That doesn't mean the agency will not go and bond. I'm talking a little bit of Transnet, and if there is an opportunity that it's good, that's where I was bringing, we will bring you the options and the different alternatives.
Yeah, but you also went as far as to make a recommendation of not to borrow, which I probably would support, but I want to understand why you made that recommendation so that we understand what you see that we're up against, and I think that's important for this board to understand.
Thank you, Dawn Batiste. I'm the CFO here at SANDAG, and this board's debt policy is pretty clear on the borrowing, and so the Transnet revenues that are pledged against this debt, we are AAA rated for our senior lien. We're, I think, AA plus on our subordinate lien. We have a TIFIA loan on this project, so we have 3 lien levels. We've maintained these great credit ratings. We have really good coverage, but the coverage is based on the full program of all of those revenues, right? The debt policy goes further to say that no debt in a specific program can drop below one-time coverage, meaning every dollar that comes in, I have a dollar for projects, a dollar for debt. So the debt policy has 2 components to it. We won't recommend necessarily doing something different in that policy unless this board really wants to. We would be starting to potentially eat into other sub-programs if, for some reason, revenues came down. And then where does it get lost across the board? The local street and roads money, the Transnet money that goes to the MTS and NCTD, the operations money. So we've tried to take a bit of a conservative approach to make sure we maintain the credit ratings. That's what has allowed us to really have low-cost debt, but to also keep all of the programs healthy. So those would be the reasons that I would recommend. If for some reason we saw a steady increase, we're able to build some reserves, then we might recommend something different. We've benefited from 5 years of the TIFIA loan not having to be repaid. They gave us a 5-year period between our draw and the start of the repayment. Fiscal year 2026 is the first year that those payments kick in, and they really really impact our coverage ratio. So we want to make sure we always have that adequate coverage.
And the revenue sources that are covering that loan you're talking about?
100% Transnet.
Transnet revenue. So it's, yeah. And is there some percentage threshold? Is it 1-to-1? I mean, it's 100% that you would borrow up to and still be able to maintain AAA rating?
Well, we look at the program. So our investors have a pledge of Transnet revenues.
Yeah.
All of the Transnet revenues come in and go through the trustee first because we have debt with that pledge. So is there another? Okay. Anyway, so our larger pledge is against Transnet as a revenue and a fund source.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look back at all of the indentures and bond documents that have been put forth to this board, the money at the top that comes in for the net annual revenues, that's the pledge.
So if we oversubscribe on major corridors and the economy goes down, we will have enough money to pay. But maybe the box for major corridors, the 38%, won't be the one that has the enough. But because the pledge is the whole program, suddenly we're going to start hitting on local streets and formulas. So that means we're going to send your cities less money, and we don't want to do that.
Or we're not going to deliver projects anymore because that money's gone, that 38%.
Okay, and we have an internal policy that says, right now would say we don't want to borrow more. Basically,
We have rules that were put on, and those rules, those guardrails are telling us, be careful because you may put in jeopardy the lockbox flows. But we will always come and give you all the options. So that's something, that was my point, is you decide, but our job is to bring the full menu, even what we in environmental call no build, well, no borrowing, and pay as you go. So we don't put in jeopardy the other lock boxes.
So there are a couple other things that I think are important, right? We track all the revenues, all the disbursements, all the fund flows in those quarterly financial reports that are provided to the board on consent. The other thing I think that's important to mention here is every year we adopt a budget. Before we develop the next year's budget, Naomi provides some updated short-term estimates. We run it through what we call our plan of finance model that helps us assess the program health to see if there's more debt capacity. It also helps us know if, what we're planning for the next budget, we can have any increased Transnet major corridor revenues going to projects. Because we have to have a balanced budget, we have to have enough money to fund what you guys approve in May as our budget. So, we do look at this regularly. You get the quarterly financials. Again, Naomi is monitoring the economy. I think we go back to her a couple times during the year to look at the revenue estimates. I think we mentioned in February when we came with the short-term revenue estimates that even the County of San Diego this year asked us to be sure we were closely monitoring the TDA receipts. We came with a negative adjustment for this year, and we tamped down a little bit our estimate for next year. So I wouldn't recommend in the immediate future any additional debt issuance unless it was a net zero. We are going to come to you later this year if the numbers are penciling out because we have a 10-year par call date on the 2016 bonds. So if the numbers pencil out to have sufficient savings according to that debt policy, we'll come to you and ask for an issuance. But it has to be, something that generates savings. We're not going to recommend anything that doesn't, obviously. So.
And just to add to the big ball of wax, we're talking Transnet right now. So in a couple of months, we may come in front of you with a bond issuance for Otay Mesa East. Non-recourse bonds that don't touch Transnet, they're solely connected to the revenue. And it could be a bond issuance or it could be a direct loan. That may also happen with the 125. if once we bring in all the menu of options, if the board wishes to pay it off, wishes to do something else. But that's coming, that's the 12, then this next year, a lot of heavy decisions are going to be asked of.
All right, so another familiar slide from yesterday is the list of the EAP projects. And again, moving through the 20 years, we have completed 21 of the 22 projects listed in the EAP covering the entire region. So to put this in context, over the last 20 years, YouTube was launched, and right now they have more than 2.7 billion monthly users, and a cost of a dozen eggs was $1.25. And now, kind of depending where you go, they're about $5. But who's buying eggs, right? Okay, so with that, we've seen what has been completed. So we heard you from yesterday. You wanted a list of Transnet projects from the ordinance. So here you go. Here's a list of all the Transnet projects in the expenditure plan. This shows what projects are currently in progress and what projects are considered future or have not yet been started. So here's a list of the 49 projects. We took projects out that have been completed, so this is not the entire 49 list. These are the projects that are left. So these are kind of like a roll-up. So this is 49 projects, but for example, in that number 49, it just says bikeway. So as you know, we have a list of bikeway projects. So even though it says 49 projects, we are doing way more projects here at SANDAG. And all of our CIP or capital improvement projects you can see in our budget, our overall work program you can see in our budgets. So this is kind of like a roll-up of what we need to do per the Transnet ordinance, and then we kind of break out projects from there as we work on them. All right, so this is going to be a fun slide. So if I could, I would jump into our DeLorean and I would go forward 20 years and I would tell you this is how much money we're going to get by 2048. But unfortunately, fortunately, I do have Naomi, but unfortunately, I can't go forward. So we need to make some certain assumptions. So in February, as Dawn had mentioned, we brought to you our recent Transnet revenue forecast for your approval. Using these assumptions, we put together the Transnet Plan of Finance, which reviews revenue estimates, project costs, and our debt portfolio. And I really want to emphasize that this is a snapshot in time. So we take numbers at a specific point in time that we know, and we put this information together. We do know that revenues, costs are an ongoing, changing item, but we need to make sure that we have a snapshot in time where we are at with our Transnet projects. So this is just a snapshot of just our major corridor program. So going back to that last slide, these are the entire list of Transnet ordinance projects. This is our revenues for that 38% box on that flow of funds and the project cost for that 38% box on that flow of funds. So as you can see here.
I have a quick question. So it looks like we're assuming a fair amount of money from the feds.
Yes, I'm getting there.
Pardon?
Yes.
Is that because we're hearing something from the feds about major corridor projects that they're okay with them?
So, yeah, so let me, I will provide an explanation for that.
It's our historic assumption.
Yes, we are going off historical assumptions. So what we are assuming, this bottom pink line here is our Transnet for new projects. So that includes when that net revenue comes in, we set aside the amount for debt. The rest is for projects. That's that pink line. So that is what we have for projects, for Transnet. Per the ordinance, we need to match Transnet 1-to-1. So for every Transnet dollar coming in, we need to bring in $1 of outside federal or state funding. SANDAG has been doing an incredible job at doing that match ratio. We've been doing historically around 3-to-1. This assumes a 3.1-to-1 ratio. Assuming we continue that, this is how much we think we would be coming in through 2048. This other local funds here, you'll see this kind of darker color in this near term. This is what we know we have coming in from other locals. This is like local jurisdictions, transit agencies that we have currently in the budget. So this is what we know that we have coming in this short term. We don't really know if we have other local funds in the future, so we just kind of account for it in the short term. So from 2026 to 2048, we estimate that Transnet major corridor only for projects will generate about $2.3 billion. Okay. Now, kind of put that in perspective. That's $2.3 billion. You've heard that some projects coming up, just the projects themselves, one project can cost $5 to $6 billion. Okay. So if we do a ratio of 3.1 to 1, we will bring in another $7 billion of federal and state funding. So we have a total of $9.3 billion of revenues coming in through 2048. So that's through the end of the Transnet program. So this slide kind of puts the revenues and the costs together. So this pink is the total of that last slide. This pink is the available funding. So this is going to be your Transnet, your federal, state, and your local. This blue line is going to be your project cost. Now again, this is just for major corridor. So I know what you're thinking, 2027, what's going on there? So as Antoinette mentioned yesterday, we have to open and start certain projects by 2035 per the regional plan in order to meet our greenhouse gas emissions and the SB 375 bill. In order to do that, certain projects have to begin at a certain time because it takes, some projects take 10 to 15 years to build. So if we're working backwards and projects have to be open by 2035, they have to start now. They have to start in 2027. So we're assuming some of these projects that need to be built by 2035 need to start by 2027. So these project costs are inclusive of both what is in the FY26 budget, so these are costs that we do know of, and projects that have not yet started. And these costs come from our 2021 regional plan. So these are costs that were developed as part of our 2021 regional plan for projects in the major corridor ordinance.
And we're using that one because we haven't adopted the 2025.
Correct. Okay. Yes. So by looking at this, we are assuming we have a $9.3 billion of revenue coming in. And if we were to build all of the projects in that extension ordinance list I showed you, based on the 2021 regional plan costs, it would cost us $16.1 billion. That currently leaves us with an almost $7 billion funding gap.
Through the chair, sorry, I know I'm up there in the air. So these are based on the 2021. Those numbers have changed due to inflation, correct? I mean, are we looking
They are
at
as in year of expenditure. Yes, we did inflate those numbers.
Okay, so what we're looking at is maybe not a clear picture?
I would say, I'm going to say a couple of things here. One, this is probably not right if you go and hold us down to the dollars and cents. But the purpose of this exercise is to show that with just projections, very optimistic projections, there's a funding gap. If we just want to do all what we had in a list that was developed several years ago of projects. Now, this is being teed off of, like I've been saying, for the conversation of talking about priorities for projects, but also talking about how we pursue policies, right? Yesterday, we talked about SB 375. We talked about RENA. So we've talked about programs. So this is the conversation is going to be, first an acknowledgement. This is just on the capital program, major corridor lockbox or part of the Transnet program. If we go with a snapshot of what our projections could be and the things that we may need to deliver by 2035, there's a funding gap. That is the moral of the story. That's what we want to get. Is it going to be 6.8, or is it going to be 3, or is it going to be 12? I don't know. You know, that's a moving target. But the reality is that we have to be cognizant that we need to adjust programs, we need to adjust priorities, we think we need to be creative in thinking of other revenue sources and many other strategies that this board, you know, will be discussing in the next 12 months.
So in the RTP, we have to have proof that we have a reasonable assumption of revenues. This doesn't look like we have that assumption of revenue, so how do we get our RTP passed? Or there's other revenues, is the formula funds, the TDA, et cetera, that would pay for some of this gap, or?
So the disconnect there is that the regional plan is all projects, all revenues. This is just the Transnet Major Corridor. Yes. And there have been changes. We have not amended the Transnet ordinance to align with the regional plan. Yeah.
I think that's one of the major issues or key factors. There's going to be a reckoning of saying we have a regional plan and we have an ordinance that had a list of projects from 2008, 2005. There's going to be that time where the priority discussion is also based on alignment, what we have in our vision. And Antoinette mentioned yesterday, we had, what is that, about 120, 25 billion, the RTP? About 125. The existing one is about, the 2021 was 160 billion, give or take, the assumptions of all the projects. But the very important piece is this upcoming RTP, if you compare it to the 2015 one, it's the same cost from 10 years ago, but yet that was on that 10 years cost. So we have substantially cut down on this upcoming RTP. We're bringing it back to the reality of our revenues. But it is going to be a strong conversation. Like we said, and Michelle said, this is just a snapshot of the Transnet list of projects. We have another big bundle of other projects. But at the end of the day, we have to have a conversation of reconciling the Transnet ordinance list of projects with the regional plan, and we have to have a priority discussion on planning, projects that we're building, environmental, and programs that we're trying to provide. Everybody comes in and sometimes says, hey, we need this, we need that, and a project or something, but we have to put it all, like I said, on the blender and land it to what can be done.
Okay, we have a couple more questions here. Robin Joy?
Thank you. If we did not have the Transnet funding at all, what would we be using as our assumed matching funds, or would it be strictly at the, I don't want to say mercy, but relying completely on federal and state funding flow?
So one of the only other local matches that we have, we can use our TDA funds, and that's very significantly less than Transnet generates. So we would have significantly less funds coming in from outside.
Thank you. Kent?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, looking at the slide in the last, obviously the revenue assumptions are based on federal funding and state funding coming in, and right now there's some uncertainty on that front. And then even just looking at the gap, you know, or you just reminded us again that the new RTP cost is, that budget is significantly less, which I imagine should result in a reduction here as to what that gap is.
We reconcile the Transnet ordinance projects with the RTP.
Right. The one thing that does stick out to me here, though, is that the project costs that are outlined according to the estimates here is that a lot of it, just looking at the chart, looks a little front-loaded. And so as you mentioned, if we're going at a pay-as-you-go sort of mode, that's really difficult to achieve. I mean, we're nowhere close to achieving any of these projects at the front end. On the tail end of the slide, it actually looks like it evens out a bit. I think my concern is, and this is just experience from the City of San Diego standpoint, we also have a significant gap in terms of our need. And what we find is that as projects ultimately get delayed, based on their timeline, their estimated cost goes up. The conditions of what we're trying to improve are more challenging, and that gap actually widens, but it's very difficult to model that without knowing where the timeline is. So I think for us, something that's always a struggle is, this is maybe what we would wish and where the gap is, but what would we actually ultimately produce from a reality standpoint based on the funding that we've got? To me, this also would reopen the conversation in my mind about the willingness to bond for funding earlier because of the ability to front load and meet some project needs that would eliminate costs that would balloon later. And so I don't know how that gets modeled, but I just throw that out there as something that might be helpful for the board to understand as they map this out.
Yeah, and you know, everything is possible. And as we mentioned yesterday, at the end of the day, this board has the ultimate decision. So if this board, as objective information is presented and alternatives, if this board decides to amend the Transnet ordinance and eliminate or adjust one of those lock boxes and enhance one of the other lock boxes, like major corridors, it's within your power. But it's a 2/3 vote that this body will need to take, and we will need to bring you, really objective information of how all those other programs in the lock boxes will be impacted. So, we're just putting everything on the table and presenting the information.
Just couple quick questions. So just to confirm, so the spike that we see for projected costs is because we're trying to rapidly get ready for the 2035, right?
Start the projects.
So how are we in comparison with the other regionals like SCAG and whatnot? Are they showing the same models too, or are we aware?
I have not compared against the other larger MPOs.
I just wonder if all these regions are going through the same fight where all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I gotta get everything ready for 2035. And we have a case to be made to the state and saying, this law you guys created, we need a little bit more extension on this time, especially with the uncertainty of...
I work a lot with the other MPOs, and some of them are in a completely different financial situation. LA, for example, the SCAG region, they have more sales tax revenue, right? They passed other measures along the way. But everybody is struggling with how we achieve that 2035 target and build all the projects that we've had to commit to in the regional plan as a result of the mandates. And regions that maybe aren't as wealthy as the SCAG region are certainly dealing with this too. It's hard to develop what the feds want as a fiscally constrained plan, right? There's that conflict between federal mandates and requirements, fiscally constrained, and what CARB is requiring in order to achieve our mandates. That gap is really growing between what's required and what's realistic.
What does SCAG have? They've got like 2 cents of sales tax. We've got a half
I
a cent.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really a lot. Yeah.
They have more money than they know what to do with. Maybe they'll send some our way. I don't know.
I just think
Councilmember Zito, did you have something?
Yeah, you were saying this is based upon the 2021 regional plan. 2021 regional plan, I believe, had at least 2 sales tax revenue measures in that. Is that in those purple bars?
No.
Okay, so this is
That does
just
not
what
account
we
for
have
that.
today.
Correct.
Okay,
But in
thanks.
the RTP, we
Yeah.
do have assumptions. Like Antoinette mentioned yesterday, we will pivot on the final to have 2 sales tax. Right now, the draft has 3 sales tax, some from the transit agencies.
But there's an MTS sales tax in there though too, because they're having...
Right, yeah, there was an MTS and there was 2 SANDAG ones, I believe. And none of that's in here.
No, this is just the current Transnet.
Current Transnet revenues
Extension,
too.
correct.
And then if my understanding of your answer to the chair's question about there being a disconnect between what's committed in the Transnet ordinance versus what's in our regional transportation plan affecting what we're seeing here with respect to the commitment, is that list anywhere that we can review? Or is that coming
There
in the
was a
future?
handout to the board in
Okay.
for the 2025 plan on
Right.
what's in the regional plan versus the extension ordinance and what has changed.
Okay, and
So
but that's not in
it's
all
not
this.
today. No, it's not.
Okay, thanks.
But we can get you
But we can
that.
get that
I'd
to
be
you.
interested in seeing that again. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, back to you.
Anything else? Okay, here we go. All right, so just to kind of recap the match ratio, the transit ordinance calls for a 1-to-1. We're currently doing a 3-to-1. In order to deliver the projects that I just showed in the last slide, we would have to double that and do a 6-to-1. This is not all bad news, though. When we brought the plan of finance to the board about 5 years ago, our expected ratio to get all the projects delivered was a 9-to-1. So we're doing better. We do this plan of finance annually, so we will kind of run the numbers again with the 2025 plan, updated revenue estimates, updated project costs, and we could get a different answer. But like Mario said, this is a snapshot of where we're at right now. So, first 20 years. Going back, let's get back in that DeLorean 20 years ago, certain decisions were made. And as some people were probably watching the last episode of Friends, the ordinance set out goals to relieve traffic congestion and improve safety by identifying 48 specific capital projects along 50 major highway corridors, and developed a list of the early action program, a list of projects to be completed first. However, which is the theme of today, a lot has changed since 2004, demographics, economic conditions, revenue and cost estimates, as well as state and federal policy guidelines. So as we have discussed over this presentation, we have some challenges coming up. Projects outlined in the Transit Expenditure Plan may no longer align with regional and/or state federal priorities. And the ordinance requires that in order for projects to be eligible for Transnet funding, the projects must align with the regional plan. And we are trying to bridge the project scope from the expenditure plan with project scope updates in the regional plan. So what does the future look like? Think about, again, where you were 20 years ago. Would you be making the same decisions? Would the decisions that you make now be decisions that make sense in 20 years? So our next presentation that we're going to provide today, we're going to talk about funding, different types of funding strings, and later on today, you'll talk about project prioritization. And with that, I'll hand it over to the chair.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Are there any technical questions of Michelle before we go on to the next part with Susan? I think we got those all out of the way. All right, very good. Thank you so much. Now we are on to the strings. Basically, the funding strings and the sources of funding that we get, we used to call them the color of money, different color money, but now we're calling them what, the strings.
Well, for today, we brought up the idea of strings because it's complicated.
Okay.
There's lots of
so we're going to
strings,
get
so
tied
we're
in
going to learn
knots.
about our strings.
Okay. On to you, Susan.
Okay. So let me go there. Okay. So hello again. If money grew on trees, or better yet, fell from the sky, funding our region's transportation priorities would be a whole lot simpler. Imagine no applications, no matching requirements, no long hours deciphering guidelines and regulations. But of course, that's not the reality we operate in. Every dollar we receive comes with strings, some short, some tangled, some tied specifically to uses, timelines, and rules. Today, Michelle and I will walk you through the types of funding that we rely on, how the landscape is changing, and the principles we use to navigate the increasingly complex world of transportation funding. Thank you. To start with some context, our current annual budget includes funding from 102 different sources. That's a wide mix that reflects just how complex and layered the funding environment really is. This includes 42 federal, 27 state, and 34 separate local funding sources, all of which contribute to the projects and programs we deliver for the region. In terms of the revenue share, state and federal sources play a major role. Together, they make up nearly 3/4 of the total revenue in our annual program budget. Relying on a variety of sources is actually a strength. It allows us to maintain some level of contingency and stability when there's economic uncertainty or policy shifts at the federal or state level. But with that diversity comes complexity. Each of these 102 sources comes with its own set of requirements. Managing them takes careful coordination, expertise, and constant attention to changing rules. This slide illustrates that while having a broad mix of funding sources is necessary and beneficial, it also means that we must be highly disciplined and strategic to manage that complexity. Thank you. SANDAG receives funding from two primary sources, formula-based and competitive funding. Formula funding is allocated to us based on a set of criteria, most commonly population size, the number of road miles, or other measurable factors. These funds are relatively predictable and provide a foundation for long-term planning. On the other hand, competitive funding is awarded based on the strength of individual project proposals. These opportunities are highly sought after and require us to demonstrate that our projects offer strong benefits, align with regional, state, and federal priorities, and score well against other applicants using a formal rubric. While formula funding offers consistency, it often isn't sufficient to fully fund our regional transportation and infrastructure needs. That's why competing successfully for grants is critical to advancing key projects. However, the challenge is that competitive funds are uncertain, highly variable year to year, and require significant time and resources to pursue without a guarantee of award. Since 2020, SANDAG has been awarded $1.2 billion in competitive grants. So essentially, that's about one full year of our annual program budget that we've received through competitive sources. But navigating this mix of funding types requires a strategic approach to maximize every dollar and align our priorities with evolving funding criteria. While securing funding is a big win, it's important to understand that funding, especially from external sources like state and federal grants, often comes with strings. So funds can only be used for specific types of projects. Some funds can only be used for certain phases, such as planning, design, or construction, not all three. Many grants require the local match, meaning the agency must contribute a percentage of the total cost using its own funds. There are often strict timelines. If funds can't be used within a window, we may lose access to them. And then, of course, the administrative and compliance requirements can also be extensive. Understanding and planning for these restrictions early helps ensure compliance and avoids costly setbacks. Proper oversight is key to maximizing every dollar we receive. I'll turn it over to Michelle, who will discuss the specific characteristics for each local, state, and federal funds.
Thanks, Susan.
Yes.
So pretty much, what we're trying to say here is each funding source has its strings, right?
Everyone.
And its conditions. And it's you know, it's hard to just keep, you know, we talk, let's say Transnet, we talk about 400 million a year of Transnet revenues, but that doesn't mean 400 can go to a subject. They're carved, and it has regulations and this and that, and then commitments to funds. And then when we're talking about those 3-to-1 sources and formula sources, they also have strings attached and conditions. Example, what are we using to pay the YOP CMAQ?
Right, so congestion mitigation, air quality, those are formula federal dollars, and there are specific requirements there.
So on that one, we were able to use it as a pilot, only as a pilot for 3 years. So right now, this last year, we're doing a swap. We're giving some formula funds to the transit agencies so they can use them for what those funds can be used. And the transit agencies are going to swap it with flexible dollars that they have to be able to pay for the youth opportunity packs. Just one example. But after that, you know, we will be maxed up. So a decision, we will need to come up with a proposal of whatever funding source we have, how we help the transit agencies to extend that program. It's not we can use this or that. We will have to figure something out. So the moral of this presentation, of this portion of the presentation, is that even if we say SANDAG is a $1.3 billion budget, and oh my God, how can you not afford $6 million, $3 million for the Youth Opportunity Pass, or how can you not afford X for this or that? Is because the funding sources have limitations, and when we start diving into that, we're very, very constrained.
Particularly with the transit operations funding. That one is very constrained.
Yeah.
So I would mention that.
There's more capital funding available.
Absolutely.
And
than
very
the
little
transit.
operations.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing that I wanted to say about the slide formula versus competitive is really hard for long-term planning because you don't know if you're going to get it. So I think that that's also a key takeaway from that.
And somebody mentioned, and look, it's hard to do a funding projection like Naomi was saying beyond 10 years right now, right? But snapshot today or this week, read the newspaper. So some days we're here, some days we're here, some days we're here. So, and you could call it on transportation funding, on tariffs, on whatever. It is very difficult to project and to plan, and you plan for your cities and your agencies to do at least a 5-year forecast, not even to say a 10-year, or to do a 30-year bond projection or a 40-year, with not having a baseline. And right now, we don't have a baseline, and people may say, how are you planning for the future? Well, we're looking, we're making assumptions, but it is very unknown. So there is some ideas that there may be more formula funds coming. There's been discussion, and less grant programs. Do we know that that's for sure? We don't. There is discussions that there's going to be there will be a new infrastructure bill because the one that we have will be running out in 1 or 2 years.
2026.
2026. So discussions have already started. Congress had already started asking for our priorities across the nation. So that the discussion has started, but is it going to be, again, based on competitive grants? Is it going to be on formula? One thing that we can kind of think about is that the country has always invested in infrastructure to keep the economy moving. So may call us wishful thinkers that will come or that will be sustained, but how it will be coming up, we don't know if it's going to be, again, formula or grant-based. So, and all those funds have lockboxes and guardrails that we will have to be thinking about our 50 or 60 funding sources. How many we have?
Well, there's 102 in the annual program budget.
So each of those 102, and each of them have different rules.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly through the different kinds of fundings that we have. So the first one is the local funds. So we do have these local funds coming in, as we talked about earlier. They are the most flexible, they're the easiest to use, and we do use them to match and bring in outside funding. So these are, you're looking at Transnet and basically TDA. The strings that we have on these, of course, are ordinance requirements, and for TDA claims, we do have to, submit claims on an annual basis. For state funds, those are appropriated by the legislature. We do have to take them to our California Transportation Commission, and they are usually allocated by phase. Examples of this is our State Transportation Improvement Program, or our STIP, which is formula funding. We have SB1 funding coming in, which is formula and competitive. We have our Active Transportation Program and our TARCP, or our Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, which are both competitive programs.
And some of the federal formula funds have been also conditioned for approval via the state. So some formula funds that come in, like some STBG funds sometimes, we still have to go and treat them like state dollars and go through the approval process. In addition, that the federal one, we have to also go through the state approval process because state law has passed mandating us to do that. So,
and these are the things that when you go to Sacramento and we go to DC, these are all the conversations that are had about, you know, how SANDAG gets moving. So this is quite the look under the hood. Huh?
Absolutely. So for some state funding, we do have some strings, as you can see on there on the left. We have to, of course, get approval to spend these funds. We have to follow timely use of funds rules. This means we have to spend the funds in a timely use dictated by the CTC. And then if we don't use it by that, we have to go and request extensions. If we don't use the funds in a certain amount of time, those funds will go back to the state and we do lose them to the region. And then
I know I keep interrupting, but I'm trying to put it so we don't fall asleep with all the conditions and put it in some real. No, you're doing great, but this is advanced subject, like the chair said. But example, San Diego double track Lagoon Bridge. That's just an example. That project has a bunch of different colors of money, among them 52 million of infra grant that it's matched with state dollars. This is another probably 50, 60 million. It's a total $200 to $300 million project. But if we don't secure the infra grant in the very near future that it's on standby, being reviewed by the feds, we would lose our date for our state, what is it, the trade corridor?
Yes, TCEP.
TCEP. We will lose the date of our TCEP allowance. So the team is doing a discussion, doing the dance with the CTC, because we were already under one extension, but we may not hit the mark, and those funds may be jeopardy. So 50 million of federal funds that are on standby could actually cost us 150, 200 million. Those are the different things that every single project is interconnected with all the colors of money or with different colors of money. And those due dates are so critical. So when the teams sometimes come to talk to you about a swap, an extension, or an additional funding, and they say, well, because we're going to lose this grant or this other grant, is a lot of due to these conditions of timing. And yeah, sometimes cost increases also. But anyways.
Thanks, Mario. All right, thank you. And then also, state, of course, has their own priorities, so we do need to follow the priorities of the state in order to spend those funds. Moving on to federal fundings, the characteristics of those is we go through the Federal Transit Administration, the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Railroad Administration. They are appropriated through the Federal Register, and federal funding must be programmed in the Regional Transportation Improvement Program or the RTIP. We do have formula and competitive funds that come through the feds. So as you can see here, there's a lot of acronyms on here. I'm just going to leave them on here. If you'd like to know what they are, come talk to me, or I'm sure a lot of you and your agencies have applied for a lot of these funds. But as you can see, there are a lot. We do get large amounts of money from these competitive funding, so like the infra funds, the mega funds, these are fund sources that pay for a lot of our large requests. Federal fund strings, of course, you need your NEPA. They have varying match requirements. So the feds have actually started pushing more towards a larger match requirement. It can vary from 20% to 70%. So our local funds are very important to bring in federal funding from outside. They do have to be programmed. We have to go through a whole authorization process. And then, of course, we have to continue to report for project closeout. So priorities for the feds. So you have to have a cost-benefit ratio. The feds want to know, what am I getting for my money? So we have to make sure that we provide something for this money that they're providing us. And then we have to make sure that we avoid adverse impacts to certain communities. And then we have to have a strong co-funding requirement and adhere to Buy America. And then, of course, I'm sure as all you're aware, DBE requirements. And then also, I think, bring up from the last board meeting, we have to follow certain contracting requirements as it comes to federal requirements. And then, as we know, federal laws continue to evolve. So even sitting here this morning, I received text messages saying we get an updated to federal funding coming in, federal cuts, new money, money's going away. So it's definitely changing on a day-to-day basis at this point. We're just continuing to move forward with what we know, and then we'll continue to come to the board with any changes that occur.
So over the past few years, we've seen a significant shift in how transportation and infrastructure funds are distributed, but like Mario said, it could be going back the other way as well. So first, there are more competitive programs under IIJA. A growing portion of the funding was coming through the competitive programs. This adds pressure to not only deliver strong projects, but also to invest in projects which align with state and federal criteria. Second, we're experiencing less flexible funding, and it's kind of because of this idea that we are going for a grant for a specific scope of work on a specific project, where we once had more discretion in over how the funds could be spent. Many programs now have these restrictions, and they will only pay for the project for which we won the grant, of course. This reduces our ability to pivot resources to meet emerging needs or fill funding gaps. Another trend that we're seeing is more funding sources per project. While it can help us fully fund large initiatives, it also increases the complexity, like Mario was talking about, when you're matching a federal grant with a state grant, right? Each funding stream requires more coordination and project management effort. Finally, federal funds are being used on more projects. This is due in part to the local and state dollars just aren't keeping pace with the costs, the rising costs. And as a result, we're kind of using federal funding, our formula, to keep many of our projects moving forward. Together, these trends mean that while there may have been more funding available, accessing and managing has become significantly more resource intensive and requires greater strategic planning and alignment across funding agencies. To maximize the impact of every dollar, we have set a few guiding principles in how we are programming funds for projects. First, we aim to use other people's money first. I think Mayor Jones brings that up at meetings too, what they do in San Marcos. So we particularly use federal and state dollars, and that helps us maintain our precious Transnet dollars locally. So we use the least flexible funding first, where there are windows of timeline and eligibility rules. Obviously, we want to use those dollars so that they're not lost to the region. And most of our funding today is project and phase specific. This limits our ability, again, to shift across priorities. We retain our local funds for matching. And finally, there are some strict rules around matching. We generally cannot match federal dollars with other federal funds or state funds with other state funds. So again, this makes our Transnet funding super valuable for leveraging these outside funds. So now I will turn it to you. And I'm going to go.
Is there any questions at this time? I know this is very thick.
Councilmember Casares has a question.
Thank you. I think you might cover this in bringing it all together, but the current funding principles make me feel a lot calmer than the rest of the presentation does. So great work, especially using the least flexible funding first. I'm really glad to not only see this in writing, but be able to keep this with me if I ever feel like that's not happening. So I appreciate that. My question is, I know we keep touching on federal funding has changed a lot, and obviously it's continuing to change. Are there any specific grants or funding sources that we should be very worried about right now? Because I know it's coming from a lot of different places, but are there any specific ones that we think are going to potentially be cut in the near future?
So we have a number of grants where we were awarded the grant, but we haven't gone and executed the grant agreement with the federal government.
Right.
So we have we've resolved that issue on one of our projects, Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, where we had $150 million. We have now executed that agreement. So we're feeling more comfortable about that. We have remaining roughly $122 million million on, I think it's 6 different projects that are included in the annual budget, which will be brought to the board next week. I have included an attachment in that board item so that the board members are aware. These are high risk. We've included them in our budget, but we're monitoring them. We're working with the federal government to kind of move those forward, and we're developing contingency plans based on the projects, when the funding is needed, what's it for, and do we have the ability to be flexible if those grants don't come forward?
Excellent. Thank you so much.
But also, I think something to answer even in from another angle. DOT Secretary came up with a memo with the priorities or principles. And so we're following that very closely. With the grants that Susan mentioned, I think the majority are eventually, they stand for themselves, but sometimes the title of the grants may be questionable. We have Reconnecting Communities program, but our Reconnecting Communities grant is to reconnect the dry side with the wet side of Navy Base San Diego. So we have asked the Navy to help us with explaining that concept. There's probably future grant programs that are going to be questioned, so we're waiting to see that. Again, wishful thinker, positive. We're hoping and we're assuming that the majority of the remaining grants will be released. Now that the thing is released on a timely basis so we don't lose matching funds. But from there on, it's basically focusing on how we're going to repackage our ask on different programs based on the priorities that the secretary put out there. Right. And I'm pretty sure we send it to the board, but if not, I'll make sure that you see that memo.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, so how do we put this all together? So what are the first things we look at? So one of the things that we look at are agency priority. Is this project that we're trying to fund, is this a priority to the agency? And timing, when are the funds needed? Do we need the funds right now, or do we need the funds 5 years from now? So going back to the presentation before, are we trying to start the project in 2027, or can we wait? Do we need to start the project in 2030, 2035? The next thing we look at is what phase is the project needed for? Is it a planning project? Is it a project development, which means is it needed for environmental design? Or are we trying to construct this project? Have we brought the project all the way forward and now do we need construction dollars? So this is important because there's a lot of times where grants come out and the grants are specific to just planning. Or the grants are specific and they say, we want to see a project built in 3 to 5 years. We want to see benefits in 5 years. So those are the kind of things that we look at when grants become available, when competitive funds become available. The next thing we look at is what kind of funding does this project qualify for? Does it qualify for state funding? Does it follow that list of priorities for the state? Does it qualify for federal funding? Do we have federal funding already on the project? Can we do NEPA? Can we do all those federal regulations for this project? Does it fall within the Transnet Extension Ordinance? If it does not, then let's say we have a project, it qualifies for federal funding, it's not in the Transnet Extension Ordinance, so what do we use for a local match? So that's another thing that we have to look at as well. Or can it qualify for other funds? Something that we haven't thought of yet. We have a master of outside funding over here who loves to think of creative sources. So then we just go to him and he finds something. And then the last thing is, once we go through all that, we need to secure the funding. So now that we have the funding on a project, we have to have time to go through all these additional steps. So we say, okay, we can fund this project. What are the next steps? We then come to you with a budget amendment. We say, board, this is how we plan to fund the project. It comes through as a budget amendment. Once it goes through a budget amendment, it goes through an RTIP amendment. We also possibly need to go to the CTC. The CTC meets every other month. They also require us to submit information 2 months ahead of their meeting. So then we need to probably think 6 months ahead of going to the CTC. And then after all that is done, we then need to have signed agreements for this funding. So that means we could fund a project, but by the time we go through all these actions, the funding may not be available to actually invoice again for maybe a year. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So these are all the things that we think about when a project comes to us and says, we need funding. It's not just, we need funding, here you go. This is kind of like a puzzle that we need to put together every time funding is needed for a project. So what are our key takeaways today? Not all funding is flexible. Non-compliance, of course, can lead to a loss of funds. Successful fund management requires planning, oversight, and collaboration with all agencies. And then project must meet external criteria, which may not be in alignment with our regional priorities. And with that, back to you.
So thank you. And the one thing that I just keep thinking is, it is amazing we've gotten anything done. And you know, you think about all the hoops and all of the funding sources and the questions and the qualifications and the restrictions and the strings and the knots and the everything. It really is astonishing that we have done what we have in SANDAG over these very many years. And I think we can also now see the challenges that we face over the next many years, if not just this next year. We are going to have to make some difficult decisions based on priorities. And now that we have this baseline of understanding that we just learned today, very dense, I know, but I think that we all have an understanding that we can't just say, well, we don't want to build a lane, so we're just going to put it into transit operations. We can't do those sorts of things. We can't just say, well, whatever, all the examples that there are. So are there any follow-up questions before we take a 10-minute break? Councilor Bredson?
Yeah, just a comment that that last slide that had the puzzle pieces did not end up in our book. Yeah, it's just blank.
It's blank.
Yeah,
So
if you'd
that's
leave it
another
up,
one we
that'd be
can give
great.
you.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any other. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 11:10.
Great job.
Everybody, please head to your seats. Okay, everybody, we're going to get started now, all right? Okay, now, it's time to bring all of this together, all that we've heard, and I'm going to turn this over to Robin Wapner, who, in her brilliant way, is going to make sense of everything that we've been listening to over the past day and a half.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair. All right, my name's Robin Wapner. I currently oversee internal operations and public affairs at SANDAG. And yes, I am going to try my very best to sort of connect all of the dots from the last day and a half. It's been a lot. I don't know if your brains are tired, but even for me, all those numbers sort of are. Oh, this is a perfect representation of what's going on and what we're trying to fix. Oh, but we've got this one over here, and you have it in front of you. Okay, so when we started the retreat yesterday, Chair Huebner talked about some of the goals that we had going into this, and one of those was really focusing on mandates. That's been a conversation that we've been having internally with staff for about the last year, really thinking about how do we balance our capacity with our resources, understanding our core mandates, and the board's work program. Similarly, we've been having this conversation with all of you as a board to help understand what are your responsibilities, what are the hats that you actually wear when you sit at the table as a board member. And so over the last day or so, we've done that, and hopefully you've had a chance to really start to better understand this slide that we've been putting in front of you all year. Yesterday, Antoinette walked us through the regional plan that will be released, the draft regional plan coming out in a couple of weeks. So that hits your core responsibility as both the Metropolitan Planning Organization at the federal level and as a regional transportation planning agency at the state level. Yesterday afternoon, we had a very robust discussion about RENA and housing that we will be continuing at the executive committee meeting next Friday. And that ties right back to your role as the Council of Governments. That's one of your core mandates as a COG, is implementing the RENA process every 8 years. We also have spent a lot of time talking about Transnet, which is very important because you all serve as the Regional Transportation Commission responsible for overseeing the local sales tax measure that was passed by the San Diego regional voters so long ago. And leading into our final discussion today, we're going to talk about how does that all come together as a consolidated agency. Does anyone here remember what it means to be the consolidated agency? No problem, I'm going to tell you. So basically, the easy way that we try to explain this is we plan and we build. When you think consolidated agency, those are the two things we really want you to remember. But hopefully, as you've seen through our presentations this week, we do so much more. So this is sort of our elevator speech. Councilmember Shin, this is for you to help explain. SANDAG plans the long-term vision for how people and goods move throughout the San Diego region for decades to come. We build the projects to make sure that the people and goods can get to the places that they need to. We preserve the lands and the habitats that we need to mitigate for those projects that we're delivering. And we provide so much. It can be anything from data to help inform the planning efforts that your cities do and other stakeholders throughout the region, to funding to each of your cities to carry out local streets and roads projects. We provide the Youth Opportunity Pass, which is free transit for anyone 18 and under. Bike lockers, employer commuter program, this could go on and on. We even implement, you all provide freeway service patrol for the region. So if you've ever seen one of those tow trucks on the freeway and you'll see the SANDAG sticker, that's basically our version of AAA. It's no-cost service for stranded motorists on San Diego regional highways. That's something that you all make possible throughout the region. And so, how do we do this? Again, this is another slide that we've talked through, and hopefully it's starting to make more sense for everyone. We do this, it all starts with the regional plan. Your fuzzy lines on a map, this is where you first get the idea. It's really about recognizing there's a need. We kind of know that we need to do something here. We don't know what it's going to be. We may not even know what mode, but we know that something needs to happen. And so every 4 years, this board goes through this exercise of coming up with the regional plan. And again, we're excited to finally be moving forward with the 2025 plan later this month. When we want it to come from an idea and start to make it more real, we put $1, at least $1, probably a few more dollars than that, a couple dollars, into the budget. This is your annual exercise. We'll be bringing you the FY26 budget next Friday for review. And again, that's going to be very much a living document over the next 12 months. And this is where we start to put the dollars in, right, if we need to start the planning or the next phase to make that project real, like I said again. But this is where the board sort of sets the intent. Then we have to put it into the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. We often refer to this as the RTIP, so that's what you're going to hear a lot, the RTIP. That's a document that's updated every 2 years. That covers the next 5 years of projects. And the RTIP basically shares our intent with the state and federal government that we want to reserve funds for these purposes for the next 5 years. Hopefully they approve the RTIP, and then there's even more steps that Michelle talked about earlier today that need to happen. Sometimes the CTC needs to authorize the funds. Sometimes we need to fill out extra paperwork. But basically, these are the 3 main steps that you need to know about how to make something go from an idea to reality. And inherent in all of this, again, is Transnet, our commitment to the voters to deliver the early action program and everything else included in the Transnet ordinance. But as we all know, none of this can happen without money. So that's why it was so important that we spend time with you this morning really digging into the budget and all of the strings and sources. As Susan mentioned earlier, we have over 100 different funding sources in the budget. And like Chair Huebner said, it's amazing that we are actually able to figure any of this out. Our finance and funding team are magicians, really. And I think what we're trying to do is really start to pull back the curtain so that all of us have a better understanding of how this works. So then all of us can be working together to figure out how we start to deliver some of our newest priorities, projects, and programs. Something I want to point out on this chart as well is if you see between state and federal, more than 70% of our budget is coming from state and federal sources. Add on Transnet, that's over 85%, which leaves less than 15% as our local, most flexible funds. So more than 85% of our budget has all of these strings. It's extremely, extremely complicated. And I just want to give you an example because, like I said, regional plan, budget, RTIP, then all of these sort of layers after that, we haven't even started talking about our contracting process, right? You asked for training yesterday. I think that's probably going to be the first training we want to do is a contracting workshop because we were talking more and more about procurement at the board, and we want to make sure that everyone understands all those layers. But let me tell you, it's super difficult, even just to buy a bottle of water. I'm just going to talk about this from I'm not delivering mega projects like Maria, but think about from a public outreach perspective. First, in the regional plan, we say we want to deliver the Mid-Coast Trolley Project. Then we put it in the budget, then we put it in RTIP. Now we need to start doing community engagement. We often like to provide water at our events so that people can not be thirsty and pay attention to the presentation. Just to buy a bottle of water, it probably goes through 2 forms and 4 signatures. So we're allowed to buy the water, right? We have to check the funding source. We have to get approval from our finance department. We have to make sure it falls within our per diem rates. We go buy the water, and then it takes another form and probably another 4 signatures to actually pay for the water. So I just share that as an example. Now imagine you're actually trying to build a project. There's so many layers, and this is part of the reason why things take so long as well. But it's important QA and QC throughout the process to make sure that we're following all of our funding and procurement rules. So Susan walked us through the principles on how we currently do this. And I was glad to hear that this sort of brought comfort to some folks because it does. It seems very straightforward, logical way to approach things. But then I think an important layer is real life, right? So from a finance perspective, our team goes through these principles and they say, this is how you can do something. And then we say, great, but our board actually wants us to do this. So can you just find a way to make it work? YOP is really important. Flexible fleets are really important. You just find us some transit dollars where we can make this happen. So that's where the strategy really comes into play. We look at the project, we look at the program, and we think about what are some of the risks that we need to be considering? How can we deliver this? When can we actually deliver this? We try to balance it with the funding that is available, the strings that are attached to that, the cost benefit of the project based on the funding available. And then we think about the policy, right? So this is where the priorities from the board come into play, priorities from the state and federal government come into play. And we sort of pull all that together and figure out what's the best value for the region. We bring that to the board, and that's what helps to inform the budget that you adopt every year. That said, there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now. President Trump just released his proposal actually this morning for the next budget. And we're seeing proposed plus ups and proposed plus downs when it comes to transportation. Same thing at the state level, right? We've sort of been riding on a high wave over the last few years, but things are very much constrained now going into the future years. And so there's a lot of questions, and that's why we've been talking about there are going to be amendments for FY26 budget. SANDAG traditionally has taken a very conservative approach to how we fund and finance our projects. So I think we're in, I would like to think, a very stable position going into this, but it means that we need to be even more mindful about the decisions we're making and how we start to make some trade-offs. Michelle was talking about how much has changed over the last 20 years. And so we are sort of at this pivotal point where it makes sense to say, given what's going on right now, given the uncertainty we know we can count on, what's the best way for us to start to proceed now? And so just like we've done with the regional plan over the last couple of years, sort of bringing you along in the sausage making, pulling back the curtain, like I said, just like we want to do with you on RENA over the next couple of years to bring you along in that way, we're also wanting to invite you to join the party when it comes to funding. And so we're having a lot of conversations internally right now about how do we approach this upcoming budget amendment when it comes to projects and programs that we're delivering. And today we wanted to share some of those sort of internal perspectives and how we're thinking about approaching the amendment to get your thoughts, feedbacks, and question as we do that. And so first I'm going to ask Antoinette to share from a planning perspective, what are some of the things you're thinking about for funding?
All right, thank you, Robin. So yesterday I talked a lot about the sort of long project development process and why it takes sometimes decades and a lot of funding and fundraising to get from concept in the regional plan to reality. And this is particularly true of mega projects, right? Some of you are around for projects like the Mid-Coast or the I-15 Express Lanes, and you know those projects didn't happen 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. They were decades in the making. We also hear a lot, not just from you, but from the community, that they want transportation solutions now. Nobody wants to wait decades for a transit connection in their community. And so the board does have some options. We have a number of mega projects that we have in the OWP that we're planning. And we could continue to charge forward with those planning activities, or we could maybe take our foot off of the gas just a little bit, focus on some interim solutions that could provide better mobility in the near term, not losing sight of the long-term projects. It's not an either or, it's a both and, but maybe slowing down that process and bringing some mobility solutions forward faster. So I'm going to give you 2 examples, Purple Line and the airport transit connection. So Purple Line, we recently finished conceptual planning and feasibility, and we learned a lot about what it would take to construct just the first phase of that project. So the first phase is National City to Kearney Mesa. We've got $21 million in the budget to do the required alternatives analysis. That's required in order to enter into the environmental stage. The environmental stage is estimated to cost $120 million. And then the early estimates on design and construction of that first phase of the project are $8.2 billion. So we can continue with that planning process, or we could direct our resources towards rapid managed lane solutions that could be up and running within the next, let's say, 5 years. Airport transit connection is similar, so we're looking at a rail connection to the airport. We have $42 million in the budget currently to do the environmental analysis of that kind of a rail connection. We could continue down that process, and then it would take probably another decade, maybe 2 decades, to construct that project, depending on exactly which alternative we go with. And the early estimates are $2 to $3 billion for that project. So we can continue down that path, or we could invest in some near-term solutions, improving bus and shuttle services, both existing and new, to both Old Town and Santa Fe Depot. And we could implement some of those operational improvements pretty quickly. So those are decisions that we're thinking about and want your opinion on as we start to think about a budget amendment and how we want to prioritize the valuable resources that we have today. Any questions about that?
What are the other mega projects that we're considering to balance against?
Can you ask me the question again?
If we're looking at maybe reducing, tightening the belt, right? We all go through this at different times in our life cycles, whether it's personally or with our cities or with our region. But in tightening the belt, if we have, say, 5 mega projects, and you're talking about 2 with ways that we might be able to tighten the belt, what are the other 3 that we're saying are more of a priority?
Well, it's going to be the discussion, but I'll give you an example on a corridor, State Route 78. State Route 78, we are doing the 1578 connector that has a managed lane going into 78 for a couple miles. Then we have that one, that environmental document is going to be released for circulation. So it's basically done, and it's going to have a 12-month circulation. That project is going to cost about $400 to $500 million. It's coming. It's imminent. It's going to provide a lot of relief in that area. In that same corridor, we just began, in partnership with Caltrans, all this, it's the 78 I-5 connector. That's probably also going to cost another $500 million. The environmental document is fully funded, and it's going to take about 5 years to get done. So in the construction of the 7815, we'll probably, to get it realized, is within the next 5 years. I don't know, Ann, if I'm kind of being too optimistic, kind of like that. But then we have in the middle, we have put in some money for the environmental document. We haven't totally funded. I don't think we have fully funded the middle section of 78. That project is not really going to happen within the next decade, or maybe in 2 decades. The connectors will, but the middle probably will not. And it's going to be very expensive because it's going to require a lot of right-of-way if we don't come out with some ideas of how to maximize the use of the footprint. Maybe a movable barrier, maybe it's not feasible, I don't know. So do we wanna park dollars on the middle portion of that project? Do we wanna program dollars, or do we wanna reinvest the dollars to realize the connectors or realize an HOV lane that it would finish the construction of the I-5 HOVs all the way to Oceanside? Like Mayor Sanchez said, finish what you started, right? And that's the remaining portion that's Caltrans right now. We have fully funded the design, so Caltrans will be ready within 2 years to put out that project. So we need to figure out how we're going to get it to construction. So we will come out with what is getting ready to be shovel ready, what it's in a midterm, and what it's in a long term. You know, the only project that hasn't been delivered fully from the early action plan is Mayor Minto's 50. You know, that has to become a priority, and he has already helped on bringing a lot of funding into it, but we need to put the focus on getting that one done, because that was a commitment way back, and it's the only one remaining. So we need to see that. We need, you know, other corridor strategies could be, do we want to put in funding for finish the environmental for 67 and doing it in phases, and funding those phases instead of pursuing fully funding the entire corridor on one shot? That may be very difficult. Finding those independent utility projects that will help us get to the finish line, but get it moving. So there will be a lot of strategies. YOP, you asked us, figure it out. Well, you know, are we going to move some money that it's in another project, I don't know which one, that has flexible funding to fund 3 million, is it? 6.5 million for YOP for a year. So are we going to go and try to get 20 million to get another 3 years? Those are the discussions we're preparing.
I just want to do a disclaimer that essentially what staff's doing right now is going through every single line item in the budget and thinking through these approaches. So we don't have specific projects to present. That would be what we would be coming back to the board with. We're not picking or choosing anything today. So I think these are really good examples, and maybe we'll just finish with Susan and Clint because they're going to have other examples, and then we can go through the presentation. So from a purely like funding finance perspective, what are some of the trade-offs that you all are thinking through as you approach this?
So I think you'll recall back to Michelle's presentation earlier today, where we make assumptions regarding our formula federal dollars that will be going towards Transnet major corridor projects. And the thought there is that the board approved this set of projects, the voters approved this set of projects, and so we're going to make assumptions that our federal formula dollars are all going towards these infrastructure projects to reduce the congestion and improve safety. However, as we look to the future, we may need to consider more flexibility in how we allocate these funds, especially on planning and non-capital programs. So bringing up YOP, the Youth Opportunity Pass, and flexible fleets. These are excellent examples of initiatives that can contribute to reduction of congestion, safety improvements, and better mobility options, but these were things that were not thought of, were not part of the Transnet ordinance. And I heard during the discussion on the draft budget loud and clear the concern that funding for YOP ends at the end of fiscal year 2026. So as we move forward, allocating the right share of formula funds to these innovative programs will allow us to incorporate some new and emerging ideas and strategies while still aligning with our long-term goals. So the upside would be, again, that we could deliver impact in the short term, addressing immediate needs. The downside is that by diverting some of these, the assumption on these federal formula dollars to non-capital projects, we may delay the delivery of Transnet projects out past 2048. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about in terms of our funding.
And conversely, when we think about flexible funding, we're also thinking about new, maybe funding sources, innovative funding sources like P3s or rent even. Right. Mario, do you want to talk about that?
Well, we will be coming with more P3 ideas, public-private partnerships. Again, what the team has said, the team is working on mandates from the early 2000s, and we need to retweak those mandates to be to the current times that we have and the funding realities. In that memo that I mentioned from Secretary Duffy, he highlights public-private partnership and pricing projects. So managed lanes, maybe a lot of our RTP has considered multiple managed lanes. Nowadays there have been some examples where companies come in and put in all the hardware and do the back office services, and they take per fee per transaction. Is that the right thing, the wrong thing? We'll look at it and we'll bring it up in that private-public partnership scenarios. We have some properties have generated rents and they're in the budget. Susan is looking at how flexible those fundings are for the rents. Can it pay for the YOP extension? We don't know. You know, there's so many opportunities that we need to look into, and we have to go a little bit outside the box and not just think that taxes or measures or other traditional ways are going to help us pay for this, for the infrastructure we need. It is still going to be the majority of the funding, of course, and the formula funding and what we get from the state and the federal, but we will have to think of innovative ways of moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, Clint, our Director of Project and Program Management, is going to talk to us sort of about, from a delivery perspective, what opportunities we might have to make the most of our dollars.
I appreciate it. I covered almost all of it. Well, I say good morning. For those that don't know me, I am Clint Peace, the Director of Program Project Management at SANDAG. Like many of you, I'm new to the role here at SANDAG. So I've been at Caltrans for 17 years, primarily in the Program Project Management area. And before Mario kind of coaxed me over it last September, I'd planned to be at Caltrans for another 15 years. So sorry, Ann. And previously at Caltrans, I worked for Mario at Caltrans, but then previous before that, Don Batiste and Fox. So a lot of good mentors. So they're coming here today, really kind of talking about opportunities, right? Different ways to deliver our projects, and a lot of what I was talking about was really about the balance. So a lot of conversation is the funding strings, restrictions, right? We talked about the process. And then the steps, right, from early planning feasibility, environmental, all the way through to deliver those projects and ultimately maintain and operate those projects. I think the importance is the balanced approach, right? How do we make sure we're doing all those things to deliver both near-term solutions and meet long-term goals, right? So I've been told to kind of cut this short. So that's true, but really, it's complex, right? That's what we've been talking about, right? And throughout this retreat, the complexity. But it's not just the engineering's complex. It is a mega projects going through the different partners, right? It's not just the funding's complex. It is. We've talked early on yesterday about just institutional knowledge and people leaving. All those things make it complex. But to me, we work through those things. With the complexity really comes, there isn't one right answer, right? The complexity is coming together, the board, and kind of together working what are our priorities, right? Where do we want to do this? So that's really the place is finding that balance. So Mario mentioned throughout the retreat, right? This is an ongoing discussion, and staff here, we're here to listen, and we're going to be coming back to you next month, years, taking that feedback, taking your input, and coming back with different ideas, different solutions, and how do we deliver these priorities. Kind of we take in and consider policy, funding, delivery exchange to provide what we talk about as best value. I think that's a key concept because what is value and that what the best value may be different to each of you. So it's kind of example I always hear from Mario is the ornaments on the tree, right? We could deliver a project that is wonderful, it's perfect, it's great on paper, but it may not actually be deliverable and able to fund it, right? So those different things. So what does value mean? Is value more trees, different size trees, maybe no trees at all, right? And so kind of what does that look like? So again, the notion of balance, I want to touch quickly on balance and the importance of having a balanced structure of projects throughout that life cycle, because you say funding is restrictive. We can't fund it all. So from a project management perspective, right, having a balanced portfolio is really key to help us weather when ups and downs in the economy right now with the federal government. But having projects ready to go allows you to take advantage of opportunities when they do come up, whether that's Prop 1B, IIJA, other things will come in the future, right? And so making sure, maybe we want to shift and fund stuff today to get stuff out, but also making sure we don't stop the future, right? We're continuing to work in those things. So we have projects that maybe start kind of taken through a feasibility study. Maybe some projects we stop at the environmental phase. Other projects we may take all the way to 100% design and we're ready to go for when those opportunities come, we're ready to react. We don't always know what they are. So the different grants come and those grants may be looking for certain things. So having that balanced portfolio allows us to take advantage of those things. And I do want to touch on, that's something that SANDAG, when I was at Caltrans, it was extremely good at, right? Of always having that shelf of projects and taking advantage. And it's not just taking advantage of grants, but every year, right, there's federal funding and not everyone delivers. So we call it August redistribution. But basically, it's the opportunity for SANDAG or the region to come in and use budget that other regions weren't able to use or the projects are delayed. And so having that shelf allows us to go do that. So, but again, it's finding that sweet spot, right? We can't fund everything through that thing, and we don't have enough resources to, right? So where does staff put the resources, the focus on those things? So I think that's a lot of discussions. What is the sweet spot of balancing? So in the end, we talk, great balanced portfolio, restrictions, funding things. You're talking about what Mario's mentioning is priorities. What are your priorities and how do we optimize those? And so I kind of came up with four buckets that really over the coming months and years get feedback from you. So there's 4 buckets, kind of right sizing, funding opportunities, phasing, and ultimately prioritization. And so right sizing. We've talked a lot about 21 plan, current projects, inflation. We all know you're all running through the same things, your own projects. We have gaps in what we initially thought projects may have been to what they are today. Some of those you've seen, a lot of those recently projects come for award and the bids come in higher and we come back for more money. That's right sizing a project. But we also have some larger projects earlier in the planning phases or environmental. We know there's a gap, but we're not ready. We don't know exactly what that gap is yet. And because that's what we want to hear back, because there's opportunities. Do we phase the project differently? Do we take some of the ornaments off the tree? So we'll be coming back to you in months and years of different opportunities to right size those projects so that we can deliver them. Talking about funding opportunities. So again, the grants. So some of the things are key. It's all these restrictions, right? Susan's job, she's amazing. I learn so all the time from her group, it's easy to say, well, I just want to fund this. But how you fund it is critical. And sometimes I got a project out there and I want you to put money on it because I want to show commitment. And that's important, to show commitment to the community that we are moving forward. But we also understand that sometimes that can put unknown restrictions. So I just want a quick example is, if I got a project that's out 5 years and we want to show commitment, so I'm going to put on our transit and RSTP dollars on those. What that means, we program those dollars through the RTIP and stuff and put it on the job, and great, now my phase is funded. But when that grant opportunity comes up, almost every grant has a caveat in there that says, we will not fund an already funded phase or project. So we've now committed our most flexible funding to a project and is now ineligible to apply for some of those grant opportunities. I think that's important for this group to understand, that we may not fully fund a phase or a project strategically to allow us to compete for those funds when they do come up. So the second is funding opportunities. What do I mean by that? A lot of things we talked about is just P3 bonding. We talked about, passage on TIFIA loans, more nuanced things of tapered matching, leveraging some of these transit dollars called 3090s, or leverage our dollars today to get reimbursed with federal and state dollars maybe the next year or two, so advancing some projects. So all these different funding opportunities and strategies that we're working through. The third thing is phasing or staging a project. So, whether it's 67 or I-5, you've seen in the I-15, phasing probably be a really good strategy in order to, you don't have, $1 billion today to go fund a project. So, okay, we'll phase it. But you got to be strategic it's got to have independent utility, right? We don't want to build a bridge to nowhere. Each of those pieces need to operate independently. And what are those pieces size-wise to go compete for those funding? What is the right breaking up of those projects? But that also is a trade-off. When you phase or you stage a project, on the long-term overall, it may cost more. It could impact the public more. So those things we look at, right? How we break that up to have the least impact to the public. So if I break it up into 4 segments, I'm probably in construction a little longer. I got, cones out and exposure to workers, other things. So those are things you take into consideration, what the impacts are when we do phase or stage a project. And the last one, I promise, the fourth bucket, is really the prioritization. And that is key to what we'll be hearing from you guys is, what are the priorities? And what do I mean by that? So safety, right? With grade crossings, emergency access on 67, safety projects, where does that fall in the list of priorities as we look to fund different things? And again, these are examples. We're going to be hearing from you guys, and it's not one or anything, but understanding where the board is on their priorities are going to help us inform what to bring back to you for ideas, right? So safety, the concept of complete systems or quarters. Finish what you started. Do we complete a system or quarter to build to HOV lanes conversions to be able to run a rapid route on it? But that may mean I'm focusing funding in a certain area rather than over here. You want to diversify funds right now and make sure that everyone's kind of getting a piece of pie at any moment in time, or do you focus on completing a system in one area and knowing you'll be moving to another area, right? Revenue generation. Do we focus on projects like a toll lane or something that generates revenue today, right? So we may shift. One idea could be to shift some funding to make sure we can implement some toll lanes in I-5 or 805 in order to generate new revenue to then go build more projects, right? And the last one is deliver now or in the future, right? Do we do the projects that are ready to go to construction in the next 3 to 5 years, or do we put more money into some of the larger projects that are important that we want to deliver, but we know are 20, 30 years out in billions of dollars? So that's kind of what we want to hear, kind of, safety, complete systems, revenue generation, or deliver now versus the future. So
I just want to try to say this maybe in a different way. What I'm hearing you say, Clint, is trade-offs. At a certain point, we're going to have to make choices between one thing or the other. And so maybe when we look at this is a good representation. SANDAG, at least in recent years, has been taking very much a peanut butter approach. Everyone gets a little bit of something, so everyone knows we care about you, and we plan to get there as soon as we can. What's happening in reality is that by spreading it that way, it's preventing us from actually being able to deliver some of the things. And so we're going to need to make, like the chair is saying, some important decisions over the next year. Are we ready to make some trade-offs to actually deliver now? And so do we want to essentially park money in a future phase, right, in environmental, or let's say design? We've got money in design, but we're still working on environmental. Environmental is not going to be done for another 5 years. That means you're holding hostage that money for 5 years when it could be used today to deliver something. So those are some of the real choices that we're going to need to be talking through with the board as we go forward. And then on this slide, I think it's important because this just came up on San Diego, right? We had talked about how we split that project, then we put it together, and the board was like, why did you do that? When did this happen? When did we weigh in on that? This goes back to optimization. So every day we're sort of looking at this to see what's the most strategic way to deliver the project now. And that could mean we're segmenting it or we're keeping it whole like our mega projects. Did I get that? Yes, okay. So I see hands popping up. Mario, I don't know if there's anything you want to add before we...
James first.
Yeah, we heard earlier the strings presentation, the requirements that come along with the federal sources of funds, right, and how cumbersome and convoluted those can become, and in contrast, how flexible the local funding can be. Given the performance of Measure G, and I'm sure all the impacts that you guys have probably talked about through various board meetings, what are the sort of strategic challenges or changes, the impacts, the opportunity costs, perhaps the prioritizations that we can expect to feel, that we can expect to see, right? I don't think, I might have missed it earlier, but I don't think this is necessarily called out. I would love to hear about how that perhaps lack of funding might impact our ability to fund some of the things we've talked about today.
I think this presentation is that, and this whole morning has been focused on that. Snapshot on where we are with the financing today. And that's with, without, or whatever is happening today, and we know. So that's the shortfall that we presented earlier, just on the major corridors, as an example. We have challenges on the different lockboxes. And the strategy is, based on those pillars that Clint mentioned, having the board, a conversation with us, bringing some, based on what we hear today, bringing in some options. As we were talking internally, preparing for this retreat, something was mentioned by the team that really resonated with me. And there was a perception that this was an employee, let's call it base organization, or run, and this is, the board is running this organization. So what our job is going to be to bring in the reality check, the menu of options, and implement those priorities. So today, what we want to take out is hearing from all of you, not specifically, I want this project, It's hearing those principles so we can go and apply it to the list of items, programs, and projects that we have to implement. So kind of going.
And just as a reminder, SANDAG was not involved with the creation of Measure G, and we never counted on that money in any of our projections at all.
But I will say, it brings us back to that pie chart for the budget, right? So let's just talk about local sources of funding. The less local sources of funding you have, the less match you have to bring in state and federal dollars, and the less discretion this board has to fund the projects that you want, because we have to follow everyone else's rules.
Okay. Councilmember Molina, and who else had their hand up?
Thank you. Can we go back to the slide with the bars? Because I have a, clarification question. When you were pointing out, Robin, to the example you cited about, let's say there is a project on design, and you're saying if we are hoping to move dollars into design, but we are holding hostage dollars in environment, like in an environment for a different project, let's say, for example, the purple line, and that is in an environmental phase, and that is going to take 5 years, for example. And we have to make a decision. Are we going to hold, that large sum of money for environmental design, for the purple line, for 5 years? And we're choosing, we have to make a decision today. If we decide that, no, we aren't going to go in that direction, does that mean then that we are saying goodbye to the purple line? Is that what you're saying?
This is not an either-or conversation. I think it goes back to the both and. It means that we direct that funding today on a project that is ready to move into that next stage, that is shovel-ready. We learn a lot through the planning process about the actual cost of that, next stage, whether it's design or construction. So it doesn't always make sense to really hold on to money in future phases of work without having all the information and detail that you get during the planning process. So it doesn't mean we wouldn't move forward with Purple Line, but if we're holding on to money for a phase of work that's 5, 6, 7 years in the future, that means another project isn't going to move forward.
So it's not saying no to the Purple Line. It's just saying Purple Line is extended another 10 years down the line.
Not necessarily. You're talking about, I think, two different things, right? So the example I gave was we could continue in the next stage of planning, which is the alternatives analysis for the Purple Line, or we could slow that project down and implement some near-term solutions in that same corridor to address what we hear from your community, Luce, and other communities. We don't want to wait 20 years. We need solutions now, right? Then the other example was, and not Purple Line, but we have some projects where we've put money in design. We haven't completed environmental. Environmental isn't going to be done for 5 years. Do we want to continue to hold that money in design over the next 5 years? Or do we want to free up that funding and put it on a project that actually is ready to move forward? So kind of two different examples.
It's cash flow management more than anything.
Cash flow management. You're saying it's not going to, it's cash flow management, but it's not impacting the actual timeline for the environmental for the Purple Line, and it's not impacting the full timeline for the Purple Line either. It's just cash flow management. You're saying ultimately you'll end up finding other sources of funding to move into the design phase for the Purple Line.
It's a risk decision, right? Also, because we don't have a crystal ball, but we have to, the cash flow management is keeping the machine moving and delivering projects as we keep pursuing funding and continue receiving formula funding and replenish or fund the next phases of the projects that are coming through. An example, hypothetical, when Antoinette was mentioning, we're working on an environmental document right now, yet we have, let's say, 30 million program for a design project. On that same design project, that environmental document may tell us that the project is a mega project, that it's actually going to require 100 or 200 million in design, making all this. So suddenly that 30 million, why did we hold it? Because we don't even know what the final approved alternative is going to be of the project. So we're like putting on a savings account for that project while other projects are ready to go, and we could keep our economy moving.
Right. I understand that. And I'm happy to hear this further clarification that, in fact, it doesn't mean, at least for the Purple Line, and I'm sensitive to the Purple Line because it is a project that I do want to see. And who knows if it's actually going to happen in my lifetime. But I do, eventually would love to see that this is something that does exist. But I appreciate the fact that you said it is a risk, right? It will add risk to that project, but I'm also happy to hear that it isn't actually going to lead to, this is a project that we are shelving. So I'm happy for that further clarification. But at the same time, we are talking about a reality check. So, I guess what I was expecting when I asked my question about the Purple Line is, give me the hard truth. If, in fact, you are saying we have to make choices and we have to put some projects on the shelf, enough with the sugarcoating. Let's make the decisions. And if it's going to be a hard decision, we're adults. We have to make hard decisions. Thankfully, I feel like maybe it's a little bit of a sugarcoat and it's not going to be the Purple Line, so thank you. But truthfully, at some point, it's starting to feel like that's the message we are getting, is at some point we're going to have to make hard decisions. And I'm getting to that point where I'm preparing for that. So that's where I'm hoping that's the direction we're going in, because this is a reality check. Thank you.
Councilmember Downey.
I've had the privilege of having worked under 3 different SANDAG directors. And one of the things I've noticed over time is that we made a lot of progress because we had shovel-ready projects when other COGs didn't, when other areas didn't. And so I appreciate the concept of reality checks, but I also hope to see when things come back for this ranking or deciding that you identify for us, these are in which of the stages. Because when we say shovel-ready, I have to talk to the other people on my council. What does that mean? Does that mean it is literally completed with design, right-of-way, and permits to be shovel-ready? And so that's just something people need to understand what we mean when we say that, because none of us want to risk not being able to build when suddenly money should fall into our laps. So I want to keep that in mind, that everybody's very attentive to what that means, and that you let us know each time that maybe we can't do this next year, but if we finish this last phase, it will be in our pockets and ready to go as soon as money jumps in. So I just don't want to lose track of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember not Councilmember, Ms. Maxson.
I am honorable, but I'm not a council member. With my regional hat on, which is not a problem for me to wear, you're right, some projects will not make it. When we do view projects, and obviously it's not personally me, but when the board views projects, can there be attached to the considerations simple terms such as, what problem is this project solving? Does this project increase safety or provide harm reduction? Those are universal regional principles along with the money aspect, but I do want to keep in mind that as Clint was talking about, ornaments on the tree or having these fancy, really need to get down to the nitty-gritty of why are we doing this project and how important is it? That was just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Edson?
Interestingly, my comments were along the same lines. But also, I wanted to think back to Build NCC, North Coast Corridor, and how that project went, because it seemed to be phased, but it was planned. And it was, certainly inconvenient all along the way, but in phases, right? So maybe it was bad for Solana Beach for 2 years, and then it was bad for Encinitas for 2 years, and now it's kind of challenging in Carlsbad, but, it seemed to work very well. And there was a lot of thought and effort that went into that. So I see that as a benefit.
Councilmember Shin.
Thank you. So I think you guys are geniuses, the way you guys plan the 2 days out, and I'm about to say why. So we're basically saying that the number one priority is the fact that we need to prioritize all these projects, right? Seems like nothing else. Funding's going to come whether we can make it or not happen, but we're about to get in a sense of scarcity, and anytime there's scarcity, it's like a bunch of rats just trying to get enough cheese, right? And so I like how you started this entire retreat, because we didn't, and for both days, we need to focus on the fact that we're going to get grumpy with each other. We're all going to get grumpy with each other, and then we're going to take it out on staff because it's just so easy, right? So that's kind of why we're preparing ourselves, in a sense, for the next few years of these challenging times. Unforeseen future, have no guidance about our budget, and then that means we have to pull projects back, and then we feel like, with some of our council members and electeds, that we always had this priority within our own jurisdiction. So genius that you're saying what you did, you're prefacing us to make sure that we're going to be calm and behave in this playground. We're not going to go to Disneyland. We're going to go to Chuck E. Cheese for a little while and get entertained. Yeah, giant rat's going to entertain us for a little bit. I think with that, there's a couple things that I see. One is, like I just said, we might beat up staff, but we need a strong staff. And just to reinforce the fact that we need to consistently make sure that we're equipping them with what we're about to face. More than what we as electeds are to be, in fact, because we know we have to take it with the public. But staff has to go in there and actually do the hard work and has to engineer what this is all going to be about and come back with recommendations. So I just want to make sure that we are patient and thoughtful, but also that like you, Mario, can give them anything that they need to thrive, whether it's training, whether it's leadership courses and whatnot.
And just to interject, I just learned that Clint, his position, we didn't have that at SANDAG before. So project planning manager was not here before. So thank you for bringing your expertise to us, especially in this time when we're going to have to be making these trade-offs. And the code of engagement is really important because we are not going to get grumpy, right?
Exactly. Other priority, and I was mentioning this in regards to like an economic analysis for the justification for our projects. And Clint mentioned something, and it kind of teed something off in my head, which is, do we do a project where there's going to be like carpool lane usage and it's going to be fees involved or whatnot in toll roads, and we can consider those as priorities because we know we're going to get a return on investment. Now that's the direct way that we're going to see value with that, but that's why I wanted to do like an economic analysis, because I would like to say we're going to move with the Losan project or one of the lines, because we've done an analysis and we know in X amount of years we're going to receive this return on investment. It's going to be passive because it may just be a highway project and we're not going to really see like anything other than the fact that we know how much economic value that's going to provide, equals sales tax increase, equals more revenue for us. So I would just like to be able to see that. We sometimes, every business I've been in, I got to figure out my return on investment behind it, right? And we're not going to do these projects for no reason. We're not going to build a bridge to nowhere, in a sense, right? And then the last thing is, it just seems like we're being pushed by the state to hit a certain mandate that we can't see, and they're not doing the best job with their own budget. So I think we have an opportunity to just say, look, we don't have good guidance right now. We know we're not going to get funded by you. You're going to be pulling back. Feds are going to be pulling back. Our county has to pull back. We just can't attain this goal, and we don't want to get penalized for it either. So I don't know if there's opportunities for us to be able to kind of push forward in that. So I just see those as our priorities moving forward if you're asking me for solutions. And I yield back.
Thank you. Councilmember Casares.
Thank you. I've been waiting for kind of the right moment to bring this up because I spoke with former council member Jack Shue before I came on the planning retreat, and he really wants to make sure that we continue the conversation of potentially having managed lanes also going east-west. When you look at the Transnet major corridor projects, you don't have any that are on the 94 or the 8 that are really going through La Mesa, Lemon Grove. And so since we're talking about alternatives and in other areas of the region, I just wanted to make sure that we continue that conversation. I know it's not necessarily something that we can do right now, but since it's sometimes an easier win, he and I don't see eye to eye on everything, but we do on this, and so I wanted to make sure I brought it up.
We do have some managed lanes east to west on the plan.
Excellent.
But we do need to have a robust strategy on maximizing our workhorse north-south corridors.
Absolutely.
And then connecting to those workhorses through the east-west connectors.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure I don't let that conversation die.
Thank you. Councilmember Chavez.
Well, I wasn't planning to speak, but since you called at me,
we thought that
I should have speak. I was looking at number 18 on page 3, and when you talk about the SR 52 managed lanes,
where
I-15.
Where are you? Page 8.
I'm looking at the other presentation.
There is no page 18, though.
No. It's number 18. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, I was thinking, and I had this conversation with Mario and Antoinette about the managed lanes and the SR 125 and all the ideas that they were bringing to me, and I do feel strongly that we should be polling the cities to see what they want, right? Because as representatives, of course, I'm gonna give you my opinion and what I think is best. But I think in this specific cases, life-changing cases for their daily commute, we should be polling the city and the constituents. And that's a recommendation I gave late at night. So thank you for calling on me.
Of course, Carolina. Okay, anybody else? Councilmember Essex and Councilmember LaCava.
Yes, so just a thought, of thinking about doing managed lanes that are pay to drive managed lanes, versus doing a sales tax measure. Maybe people are happier to spend an extra quarter for something they pay for than they are to spend, $5 a week or something like that. I don't know. Just a thought. I mean, put it to the public, do some surveys, figure out what people are more comfortable with.
Good point. Council President LaCava.
Yeah, I'll segue from that. I appreciate Councilmember Shin kind of encapsulating what the brilliance of this day and a half, and kind of either subtly or not so subtly kind of walking away with, wow, we're either going to cut programs or we're going to find new revenues. And I don't think we as elected officials often hear that enough, because we have our dreams, maybe our pipe dreams, and we think, staff, go make it happen, go make it happen. And that hard reality of either we're going to shift some money around because it's good cash management, as you all described, or having to prioritize projects differently or to find new revenue sources, none of which are happy choices, but they are the hard choices of where we're at. So I'm going to kind of close with this. We're obviously, the board's going to be asked to adopt the budget next Friday. What's the timeline for these new conversations about prioritizing where we're holding cash, et cetera?
It's going to be ongoing during the next 12 months as we're developing strategies and looking at realities also from Washington, how we're being impacted with the grants that will get fully approved or not. So there are a lot of moving pieces, but we're setting up the conversation for the next 12 months. You will be seeing us coming with different buckets of ideas on different subjects. Yeah.
Okay. Mayor Sanchez. Thank you.
Thank you, and I know this is going to be an ongoing process, that I may even be off by the time it changes again type thing. As to the I-578, that is a very controversial project in terms of that interchange, in terms of public input and also the challenges in terms of being next to an area, there's a lagoon, but also a place where folks were buried and are still buried. But I just want to say that I know that it is an ongoing thing. And so maybe the funds, maybe projects that are seem critical now may not be so critical if these other moving parts end up working better in terms of mass transit. Or maybe using buses, say, with lifted platforms. And I mean, there's all these other ideas, right, in the background that might be cheaper or not, I get less costly, but that may end up doing better for our community. So I'm excited that we're all working together and realizing that some projects may go first, but that it's all about the entire region, and that some things will get to the North County, right? Eventually. Just certain areas don't forget us, is all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I see nobody else. Oh, Councilmember Zito?
Yeah, thanks. Guess I don't necessarily need to state the obvious, but relative to the conversation that we've been having earlier and relative to the comment that Supervisor Anderson made earlier about what can drive poor behaviors, I just worth note relative to the timeline that you outlined, Mario, that this year is not an election year. Next year is an election year. So let's see if we can get to the harder decisions sooner rather than later.
That's a very good note to end on. Yeah, really good one. All right, so thank you so much, everybody. This has been a really good discussion. I want you all, before I turn it over to Mario, pull out your phones right now. And I want you to scroll to March of 2026. And I would like you to mark that the 2026 SANDAG Board of Directors retreat will be March 19th and 20th. All right? So please do plan for that and put it in your calendars. It's in ink. Because you can see how important that this day and a half was to the understanding and laying the foundation for the work that we have to come. So I'll get there, yeah. All right, so now, Michael, let's go ahead and take public comments.
We have 2 public comments, Chair. The first is Catherine Rhodes, followed by Truth.
Hello, Catherine Rhodes. So 4 years I've come here to tell you a new funding source, and that's the airport revenue. We're a grandfathered airport because we're on port tidelands. So what you could pay for the airport with airport revenue is the $30 million that you already spent on the Central Mobility Hub and the $42 million for the airport transit connection. $72 million cash you could use for another project. The solution is to get the California Attorney General Banta to confirm that we're a grandfathered airport, and then also look at the 2021 decision from the FAA about being able to use airport revenue off airport for projects that are not just only for the airport. So, the airport authority right now has $561 million in unrestricted cash, another $267 in restricted cash, for a total of $828 million sitting around, not toward any particular project because they've already pretty much funded everything. That money used to belong to SANDAG. Before the airport authority, used to be, the money used to be in SANDAG, and it only got taken out when we were going to try to move the airport over to Miramar. And at that time, they started the passenger facility charge also. So all this money is coming in. It's supposed to really go to you, but instead of going to you, you guys all ignore it. Not one of you has ever come up to me and asked me about it to show the evidence I have for you. I have all these documented evidence for it. Why won't anybody have any type of leadership on this and actually ask me about it? Not one person here. You think you would want this money so that you could, use it for any project that you guys want. But instead of that, you're not. So anyway, in 2021, there was a few different things. We have the airport compliance manual that came out again.
Thank you, Catherine. Your time
Thank
has
you.
expired. Next is our last public comment, Truth.
All right, Mario, I've been trying to be SANDAG's reality check for over 2 years now, and I'm glad that Luz is finally ready to accept that. Ethics became engagement. Why? Do some fear ethics? It seems like transparency is another fear, since the respectful and honest collaboration information was not publicly provided, which is disrespectful and dishonest, so please provide it in the public record. But I liked what Luz said about it being okay to disagree, so I disagree about more talking. Some talk plenty already. However, Latchkey Kevin, you're on the money with innovative non-tax, non-debt ideas. Now I just need to fill you in one day on past SANDAG dysfunction, which is why a code exists. I believe it was Jennifer yesterday who said former Santee Mayor Dell used to go everywhere delivering a SANDAG 101, and I also do that sometimes. I support Carolina's idea of MTS public safety info at the BOD. I'd also like to hear more focus on our seniors' needs as well. And Anna, great job on your concise points. Mario, thank you for clarifying staff's role. Please make sure staff pays attention to all forecasts with proven data. In part 1, why would project cost go down after 2032, especially if the matching ratio forecast looks bad? Part 2, thanks for the honesty that funding comes with strings. How does OME adhere to Buy America if commercial trucks will be coming with even more goods from foreign countries? Part 3, the current strategy says best value. How do empty buses like the 227 and IB fit that? Under flexible funding, there's a photo of 3 unaccompanied minors about to ride a trolley. And there you go. There's your YOP in action. Child trafficking pass. Highway, bike lane, and public transit safety should be the #1 priority. I don't know, but that should be common sense. The best part, one of the presentations made me want to go, great Scott. So thank you, nerds. I appreciated the retreat. Too long, though, but thank you.
That concludes our public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. And I want to conclude the day by thanking all of our facilitators, Ken and Catherine, and for another productive day, as well as the venue staff who've been really helpful in preparing and coordinating for the past 2 days. I also want to thank each of you for spending time away to think big picture and to set up for continued success for this year. I think we had several key takeaways from the past couple days. Number one, so much continues to change. How do we as a board continue to navigate this? 2, intent versus outcome. We continue to see the state put mandates in place that, while created with good intent, often do not lead to the intended outcomes. I'm happy to know that this is something we're actively working on through SB 375 and RENA reforms. More context, whether it's our staff reports on the role of our policy committees, there's a desire for better understanding of the history, the background, roles, and purposes. This will allow us to empower our technical staff to do their jobs, and we just saw how much they do in their jobs. It's amazing, so that we can focus on the more high-level decisions. Communication across the board. We want to find better ways to communicate our mandates, our role, and our work in a way that people can understand. And lastly, we're moving in the right direction. I heard that we appreciate the tenor and tone of how we work with staff and how we work together, and we want that to continue. So this concludes our meeting, but before we do, I have some sad news to share with you all. We are sad to share that the passing of Rincon Band of Luiseño Indians Chairman Bo Mazzetti. Chairman Mazzetti was a champion for tribal nations, especially those in California. He was elected tribal chairman in 2007 and served 5 consecutive terms. Bo was also a veteran of the U.S. Navy and a Vietnam War veteran. He's engaged with SANDAG since the inception of the Tribal Consultation Program more than 20 years ago. He pushed us to be better. At times he challenged us, often a vocal opponent. If you all remember the last Tribal Summit, he was rather blunt with us, and I really, really appreciated that about him. But he was always speaking with the purpose of protecting tribal sovereignty and advancing the needs of tribal communities. Thanks in part to his advocacy, we now have initiatives like the Intra-Regional Tribal Transportation Strategy, the ITTS, and we continue to move forward on tribal priority projects, including improvements to SR 76 and the I-8 at Willows Road intersection. Chairman Mazzetti believed in building partnerships while never compromising the identity and sovereignty of tribal nations. He was a leader, a veteran, a voice of strength in our region. On behalf of the board and staff at SANDAG, we offer our deepest condolences to the Rincon Band of Luiseño Indians and his family. I'd like to take a moment of silence to honor his service. Okay, this concludes our meeting. The next Board of Directors meeting is next Friday, May 9th at 10:30 a.m. The Executive Committee is prior to that at 9 o'clock. This meeting is adjourned.